Well, good morning everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Sunshine Coast Regional Council for March 2022. If you hadn't been keeping track of it, this is probably about halfway through the current quadrennial. So well done on getting to halfway. Long way to go, and lots of things to be achieved. So let me welcome all of our councillors, staff, members of the public who are in the gallery, and those who are joining us via live stream. I'm going to ask the chamber to be upstanding and ask Councillor Dixon if he would make the acknowledgement to the Traditional Custodians, please.
Good morning, everybody. On behalf of the Sunshine Coast Council, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the Sunshine Coast local government area. We recognise that these have always been places of cultural, spiritual, social and economic significance. The traditional custodians' unique values and ancient and enduring cultures deepen and enrich the lives of our community. We commit to working in partnership with the traditional custodians and broader First Nation, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to support self-determination through economic and community development. Truth-telling is a significant part of our journey. We are committed to better understanding the collective history of the Sunshine Coast and the experiences of the First Nations people. Legacy issues resulting from colonisation are still experienced today by our traditional custodians and First Nations people. We recognise our shared history and will continue to work in partnership to provide a foundation for building a shared future with the Kabi Kabi and the Yinabara people. We wish to pay respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the important role First Nations people continue to play within the Sunshine Coast community. And as I always say, Mr Mayor, together we are all stronger.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Whilst we're upstanding, I'd invite Pastor Phil Greenbury from the Life Point Church, Budrum, to read the prayer. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, councillors. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, we want to say thank you so much for our Sunshine Coast. Thank you, Lord, for the generations it's touched in the past, and thank you for the generations that will touch to come. Lord, as I pray today, Lord, I just pray for each of our councillors for wise decisions as they make their decisions. We ask you, Lord, that you'd lead us and guide us. We pray for our families. We pray for people in need. We pray for the progress here on the Sunshine Coast. Ask for your hand to be on it. I pray for each one as they make hard and tough decisions, Lord, that you give them wisdom, insight and strength. And I just really pray, Lord, in all that's said and done, that we'll see a great advancement here on the great Sunshine Coast. I pray this, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Phil. Please remain upstanding. And I'll call on the CEO, Emma Thomas, to pay a tribute to former employee Scottie Law.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through you, councillors, today Council pays tribute to Scottie Law, who was a civil field worker who passed away on Friday 11th of March following a year-long courageous battle with cancer. Scottie joined Council in 2011. He was a valued member of CAM's Civil Operations Asphalt crew. He was a knowledgeable member of the Asphalt crew, and his colleagues describe him as a hard-working, honest bloke who was also a gentleman. He was a devoted family man and took great pride in his most important role as father and husband. We offer our condolences to his wife Joanne Law, who is a long-term council employee with our Sunshine Coast Stadium, and his two sons who he adored. A self-confessed car fanatic, he spent some of his spare time on vehicle restoration. Scottie was also a huge West Tigers fan and took great pleasure in coaching rugby league locally for the Nambour Crushers. Council pays tribute to Scottie Law and remembers him. Rest in peace, never forgotten.
Thank you, Emma. Please be seated. Councillors, I've got the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 24th of February 2022. Someone to move. Receipt, Councillor Johnston, and a seconder, please. Councillor Landsberg, thank you. All those in favour of receipt? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillors, we'll go to the first item this morning, is item 8.1. Oh, sorry, my apologies. Let me backtrack. I just need to inform councillors that I draw to your attention that on October 12, 2020, amendments to the Local Government Act 2009 and Local Government Regulation 2012 came into force. The amendments include the new Chapter 5B, which sets out legislative requirements for dealing with councillors' conflicts of interest in local government matters. These arrangements will apply to how we manage such matters at this meeting. So please, if you do have a conflict you'd like to raise that with the Chamber prior to the item. So we'll go straight to item 8.1, responding to the climate emergency, and I invite Gillian Smith to give us a presentation. Thank you, Gillian. We've got Dr. Dave Moore on Teams and Gary Duffy here as well as part of the presentation.
Good morning, Mr Mayor and councillors. This report is in response to the November 2021 Council resolution recognising that we're in a state of climate emergency, requiring urgent and sustained efforts to achieve our net zero emissions by 2041. The resolution also requested that we report back on the progress of 3 other bodies of work, including our zero net emissions planning for the organisation, the regional project we're doing with Noosa to develop a climate action roadmap, as well as including interim recommendations to strengthen the daily actions of Council in response to the climate emergency. Our response to climate change continues to be an important part of our planning and action to advance and realise our vision as Australia's most sustainable region. In doing so, we need to ensure that our foundations are strong, progressive and responsive to the change already upon us, that we deliver the required integrated and associated investments to realise both our vision and demonstrate our commitment to climate action. And we also need to recognise the urgency of the call to action to be more sustainable and to embed organisational change required to collectively achieve our vision across all our business and service delivery areas. It has become clear that the next 10 years is the decade of action globally, nationally and locally. In responding to the climate emergency, all levels of government, council and the Sunshine Coast community need to be working together to stop the worst of the impacts eroding our livelihoods, our livability, prosperity and health and wellbeing. In February 2022, the IPCC report was released, which outlines the impacts of climate change, how we can adapt and where we are most vulnerable. A key observation in that report was that many risks for human health and well-being could be reduced and some potentially avoided if we collectively reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and strengthen our adaptation responses. For the Sunny Coast, the 3 aspects of our climate response are organisational emissions planning, climate risk management, which is understanding and proactively responding to reduce our climate risk, and also supporting our community's readiness to reduce their own emissions and to increase their own adaptive capacity and resilience to a changing climate. This approach will ensure we not only adapt appropriately to maximise the economic, environmental and community resilience of the Sunny Coast, but that we're also well positioned to harness the opportunities that will undoubtedly come as a result of taking the action needed. With respect to supporting our community's readiness and a shared responsibility to climate action, Council needs to ensure that we're leading by example and communicating our commitment, so our community has confidence we're actually taking meaningful and timely action as required. Our governance needs to be strong, which covers our capacity, decision-making processes, resourcing and organisational culture. So our climate change response is considered and embedded appropriately across our internal businesses and external delivery areas. We need to ensure that we understand our climate risk and the need for long-term adaptation planning. The CHAS is a good example of this and looks at the couple of the climate risks in relation to storm surge and sea level rise. We also need to ensure we're responding to the risks appropriately and are focused on delivering the required priority risk reduction actions. This means building on existing actions where we can, responding to the gaps and maximising the opportunities to realise co-benefits. If we do this, it will enhance our livability, health and wellbeing, broader sustainability outcomes, and ultimately strengthen our regional economy. We also need to make sure we're monitoring, reporting and evaluating the effectiveness of our response to meeting the defined targets and our adaptation planning. This needs to be done in a transparent way and to ensure we make the required adjustments to remain on track. And lastly, the climate risk information is made available in a form that is easily understandable by our community. This will actually help them build increased ownership, awareness and a shared responsibility for taking climate action. Emissions reduction planning is critical to contribute to mitigation efforts to slow down the impacts that are already locked into the global climate system and to not go above a 1.5 or to 2 degrees of warming. Emissions reduction is needed to give adaptation planning a chance. While there is currently no explicit federal or state legislative imperative for emissions reduction or adaptation planning for that matter, the Paris Agreement, financial markets and the spiralling costs of disaster recovery and insurance are driving coordinated global, national, state and private sector action to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. As part of the broader societal response, there is also an expectation that councils play their part and contribute to achieving the Queensland Government's state target to reach zero net emissions by 2050 and its interim target of at least 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. However, we should expect this target to be accelerated due to the climate positive target of the 2032 Brisbane Olympics and Paralympics. For us, our environment and livability strategy has set a target to be a zero net emissions organisation and low carbon community by 2041. As we work towards achieving this target, we have established a comprehensive understanding of our emissions footprint through our annual organisational sustainability monitoring and reporting. As part of our planning, we're ensuring our emissions trajectories are aligned to the latest science. Our carbon footprint is updated to meet Commonwealth requirements, and we are identifying the best emissions reduction opportunities, which are in the areas of waste, supply chain procurement, expansion of rooftop solar and renewables, LED street lighting upgrades, and a transition of our fleet to hybrids and electric. Other opportunities will come online as new methodologies are developed. In recognition of the collaborative response required to realise our target, our planning has included engagement with and input with key stakeholders across 5 council groups and 16 branches. A critical component of the plan is the inclusion and implementation of open, transparent annual monitoring and reporting of our emissions to inform the necessary action required for the year ahead so that council remains on track to meeting its emissions target and informs budget investment decisions. A plan that provides a coordinated and integrated approach to reduce our organisational emissions is being prepared for council consideration in mid-2022. Climate risk management is about understanding the physical climate hazard, i.e. that is the storm surge, the bushfire, the extreme rainfall or the slower chronic changes of reduced rainfall or increasing sea levels, and how to reduce the exposure and vulnerability of people, assets and activities so the impacts of climate change are minimised as much as possible. Adaptation and resilience planning are key to this and go hand in hand with emissions reduction efforts. With respect to this element of our climate response, Council is delivering the Regional Climate Action Roadmap project in partnership with Noosa Council. The project is piloting the first of 3 phases of the Climate Risk Management Framework for Queensland local governments, with the aim to encourage logical, defensible and effective actions to minimise the overall cost of climate risk reduction within a local government context. Application of the Risk Management Framework and Guideline provides a leading national and international best practice approach to climate risk mitigation. With a focus on strategic climate risk profiling, phase 1 of the pilot has involved undertaking a high-level sweep of our regional climate risks. It's sought to better understand attitudes, awareness and willingness to act of both the community and our staff as the basis for a shared understanding and ultimately a shared responsibility for action. We've also gained a better understanding of how services delivered by council are likely to be impacted by a changing climate and what we can do to reduce exposure and vulnerabilities to both council assets and activities and our community. This is all with a view to developing an agreed strategic response for future priority action. This project, the phase 1, is due for completion by the end of May, and the project has already delivered a number of deliverables, including community and staff surveys, regional industry and community leader workshops, and the preparation of resources to raise awareness and understanding of climate impacts and risks. These will be made available soon through a community-facing project website, which will be linked to our corporate climate change page. Staff and community engagement undertaken has identified the need to improve both the capacity and capability of staff and the broader community to actually take the necessary climate action. This is critical to delivering a well-adapted and resilient region. Delivery of this pilot and continued delivery of best practice climate risk mitigation approaches, such as the next phases of this framework, would assist to improve our organisational capacity and capability. Across both emissions reduction planning and climate risk management, there is an ongoing need for Council to provide leadership and support to our community so they can reduce their own emissions and increase their own adaptive capacity and resilience to a changing climate. Although the vast majority of community-based emissions are outside the direct control of Council, it is proposed that an emissions reduction plan would be developed in partnership with our community to support Council's own emissions reductions activities as part of a broader climate action response. Through the Regional Climate Action Roadmap pilot, engagement with our community and regional stakeholders on climate risk management has commenced, with much goodwill and support to continue to work together to improve adaptation outcomes and grow a collective resilience. The last body of work to report back on relates to how we can strengthen our daily climate change response. Embedding system-wide changes such as climate risk considerations is definitely no easy task, particularly for large organisations. Interestingly and very timely, the February IPCC report has identified 2 new risks: cascading impacts on cities and settlements, and the failure of institutions, both public and private, and the associated governance processes to be able to manage climate risk in the first place. This is because the gap between what is currently happening, being delivered on the ground, and the response needed is rapidly widening. Council, that said, does have a well-formed corporate governance framework already in place that has the core elements required to strengthen our climate change response via our corporate goals and pathways. This relates to our policy and planning, whereby we can strengthen our response by ensuring our policy frameworks and supporting documents reflect both the urgency and our strategic climate change response across environment and livability, economic development and community planning to deliver our vision as Australia's most sustainable region. Through our organisational framework, we can strengthen our response by ensuring the structural elements relating to good governance, democratic representation, ethical decision-making, social inclusion, and meaningful community engagement reflect climate change considerations. This aspect cannot be overemphasised, as climate change is expected to exacerbate social inequalities and social injustices over time. And via our accountability framework, all those functions, systems, services and activities we're responsible for to ensure we have appropriately anticipated the impacts of climate change, to provide assurance of transparency, ethical behaviour and support, sustainable financial management of community assets and infrastructure. There are some more immediate opportunities which we can implement straight away or relatively soon, and some of those, this is not exhaustive, but some of these include finalising and subsequently implementing our emissions reduction planning. This is on track for mid-2022. Establishment of an executive senior leadership climate change working group to provide organisational oversight. This would be sponsored by GE Filana. Investigate the partnership opportunities to assist Council with institutional strengthening. And this is as it relates to increasing a robust climate change response. We need to continue to deliver best practice climate risk reduction approaches whereby our response to emissions reduction and climate risk reduction are embedded as business as usual. For example, through the finance, the capital planning and asset management design and delivery processes. This is also underway and will form a key part of the zero net emissions planning and adaptation planning for the following financial year. An easy win is also including climate risk reduction considerations into OM agenda reporting processes, and I'm aware we have commenced those discussions with meeting management. We also can increase the visibility of Council's climate change response on the corporate website. This has already been actioned. We also have established a website, a project website for the regional project with Noosa, and that is actually recently about to go live, and we will connect that to and link it to the Council's corporate webpage. We also will continue with embedding climate considerations across our governance framework as discussed, and those internal discussions have commenced also. And we are actively seeking grants to assist with implementation with 3 submitted, and we're waiting to hear back with the outcomes of that shortly. Of course, there are actually going to be, our response requires more medium and longer term action, because it's actually about organisational change and it's systemic change required to recognise that we've now entered a new operating climate. It's not sometime in the future, it's actually here with us now. Key to this understanding is how to work with and embed adaptation planning into current planning and design processes. So this is something that all councils, all levels of government are grappling with. Councillors, I recommend that you receive and note the report titled Responding to the Climate Emergency. Note the project updates provided in regard to Council's zero net emissions planning and climate risk management, and note the interim opportunities identified to help progress our organisational response to the climate emergency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gillian, thank you. Can I get a mover, please? Councillor Suarez, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Law, thank you. Would you like to open, Councillor Suarez?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. What an amazing individual you are, Gillian, and that's evidenced through the work that you've already done. Stop it. This report before you today is in response to the resolution from the November ordinary meeting, and that resolution included acknowledging the significant work already undertaken by Council and explained by Gillian, and accepting the 6th assessment report of the IPPC regarding the Earth's climate and our response. So to achieve net zero emissions by 2041 is a huge undertaking, and it's an ambitious target that may not be achieved through actions alone. In addition to Council's own responsibility in reducing emission, we will aim to educate and provide opportunities for the communities of the Sunshine Coast to play their part and become a low-carbon community. Gillian's outlined the way forward to achieve these aims: emissions reduction planning, climate risk management, community readiness, and finally, our governance embedding our response. For full disclosure, I asked Councillor Law to delay his notice of motion because Council were already undertaking actions 1, 2 and 3, and I was unclear how a governance framework was going to add any value to what was already being done. I thought it would be better to wait for the results of the Regional Climate Action Roadmap work we were undertaking with Noosa Council. I also thought a finalised zero net emissions plan would add value to the debate on becoming a zero net emissions council. This scenario would have provided a full and robust report to the agenda that would have come to this council and been publicly available on the record. I still think I'm correct in my thinking on the delivery. However, the situation we find ourselves in today, because Councillor Law pursued a notice of motion in November, is better. Even though we don't have these finalised documents, I have observed constant discussions that relate to reduction planning, our risk management, and how our communities can help. So credit where credit is due, and that credit goes to you for being steadfast and determined not to wait until those reports were ready and racking up 5 months worth of conversations, planning and thinking that is now occurring throughout this organisation, when otherwise it might have only occurred in siloed council departments. So councillors, I urge you to support the officer's recommendation in this report, and I look forward to the day the finalised reports will be presented to council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Suarez. Councillor Law.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, my CEO, Gillian, Bill, the whole team that has taken advantage of that additional 5 months to really focus the vision of the organisation on what do we need to do given the emergency situation that we're in. Councillor Maria, thank you for your comments, appreciated, and yes, I think we're doing better, but I just want to remind ourselves that would be doing better still if we'd done this 10 years ago. However, we didn't, and we've got what we've got. And we are in an urgent situation. We recognised that in November last year, and we were able to have a very robust conversation and achieved a unanimous decision at that time. Having done that, we still remain in a situation of huge urgency. We must urgently mitigate and we must urgently adapt what we are doing and how we are leading our community during this very important time. Important because if we don't do anything, then in 4, 10, 20 years' time, I have no clue what the conversations might look like and who will be having them and where we will be having them. But we're beyond conversations, we're at action. And thank you for the report that has come back to us. And I will certainly be urging everyone to support this today. And I urge and I hope that we will get, again, unanimous support for this step on the journey, because we have to provide very strong, clear leadership to our whole community. The new risk that Gillian mentioned in the report from the IPCC being the failure of governments and private sector to react. We are seeing the evidence of that all around us for those of us who are willing and prepared to look and think what that means. So we have to do this. It is a matter of huge urgency if we are going to attempt to keep up with the impact of climate change. But we actually have to not just keep up with the impact of climate change, we have got to do everything possible to get ahead of it and to try and stay ahead of the curve. Because if we can get ahead of the curve, then we might be able to start to bring the curve down a little. And I'm confident with what I've seen, not only through this report today, but what I'm seeing in the conversations I'm becoming a part of, I am really confident that we will provide great leadership for the whole Sunshine Coast region, and through our work with Noosa beyond, and we will be able to demonstrate what's possible when people act and when a whole community acts and comes together behind the leadership that we're showing. And that is very, very important. It is up to us to provide the leadership because it's been missing elsewhere. And I'm absolutely delighted to be a part of the team of people who have come together and recognised that, not only this group in the room today, but across the whole council operation. So thank you, Gillian, and your team, to Bill, Madam CEO, for how far we've come in the 5 months since November. But we've got a lot more to do, but with what we've got so far, I know that we will be able to do it, and that we will keep very careful track of our achievements through, for example, having this embedded in our corporate plan and the quarterly reports that come back to council on a regular basis, obviously regular, quarterly. So thank you very much for where we're at, and I commend the report and the resolution to all of us so that we can continue to do the urgent work needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Law. Councillor Natoli.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Gillian, I had no doubt that you would be able to put a document along with the other team together that's outstanding. I had total confidence that we've got some of the best people working for this council in this space, and we're really blessed and thankful for the work that you and the others have done. We saw recently the floods that we've had here in South East Queensland. We've seen how many people being displaced from their homes, and I think this is an opportune time for us as a community to really understand what the impacts of climate change can really mean to our areas. I mean, we know the intensities of these storms. We hear around, see around the world, communities, towns, areas that have been impacted by very severe storms, and all attributed to the fact that climate change is probably making that happen. I've no doubt that eventually, our coast will face the challenge of a severe cyclone. We haven't seen one, but it would possibly be on the cards with what we've seen previously with climate change. And I know that there's been work that's been done in terms of how many people would be displaced from their homes if we were hit by a Category 5 cyclone in South East Queensland. And scary. I don't know how we could cope being able to accommodate those people that won't be able to go back to their homes. And so it raises, in the three themes that you've got here, the second one, is reduce our climate risk, and climate risk management is very important for us as a council. We're going to show that leadership, that we've got to understand that we either put people in harm's way or we take that harm away by the adaptation strategies and the planning and the process that we go. And I'm still struggling. And we had that opportunity with this current planning scheme, new planning scheme, of moving a large percentage of people into that very vulnerable coastal part of our community. An area that I think will be severely impacted by cyclones, by storm surges, by flooding, and it means that a lot of those people may very well be displaced from their homes, may not be able to get insurance in years to come. And for me, I think, we have a time to think about whether that is the right strategy, knowing that we could be putting them in harm's way. It's lovely to be able to live close to the beach in those low coastal plains, but the fact is that more than likely, if we are hit by a major cyclone, they are going to be the ones that are going to take the full brunt of that. So I would hope that this gives us the opportunity to go back and say, well, before we make that decision, let's really seriously think about what that impact is going to be. I'm hoping through the detailed business case of the mass transit that they realise that fixed tracks and overhead wires may not be the most adaptable way of being able to deal with a mass transit, and something more flexible. And so, we saw in the recent flooding how Aerodrome Road became flooded, and it would mean that mass transit wouldn't be able to operate when that happened. Brisbane Road flooded. Again, the pathway and road where the mass transit will be. And I'm hoping that the detailed business case will understand that and hopefully come up with a solution that will be a lot more flexible. So I'm urging the council that we take this seriously and understand that we can make a difference. The planning scheme, obviously our future planning of where our population go, I'd love to think that we could go back and rethink about where we put them in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Natali. Councillor Hungerford.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I'll be supporting this today. There's a lot of aspects to the climate emergency. The big one for me is the emissions reduction plan, because that's the crux of achieving results. Our biggest opportunities for emissions reduction are in the areas of waste, supply chain procurement, expansion of rooftop solar, renewable energy, and street lighting upgrades. And on the street lighting, it's a large network. To change that from halogen to LED is an enormous task. But we're doing that each year sustainably and progressively to change that lighting to the LEDs. The amount of electricity used is greatly reduced. We can't do it all in one hit, but we're at it all the time. And each year we have a budget for that, and we're gradually improving the lighting system right across the region. The other one is very important, what we're doing with implementing the FOGO. Food organics and garden organics. We're expanding the green bin to get more of that organics out of the dump space. Not only is it filling the dump space up, but that's where a lot of your greenhouse emissions are coming from. And flaring and removing that as it's releasing from the ground will be greatly reduced. But it's broader community education. It's important for people to understand why we're doing these things. Because it's not just doing one thing massively that makes the difference. It's a whole range of little things we're doing that add up over time. We're on the path. It's a long journey. There's a lot of good work being done. Not all of it can be achieved overnight. It takes years. But, as David's President said, you've got to have a starting point and we've got to progressively work towards it. And that's what we are doing. So, councillors, this is very positive in the direction we're heading. We're making those tough decisions and mandating the green bins and then bringing in the FOGO and getting it out of the general waste. It takes a while for the community to understand what we're doing, but we're doing the right things for the right reasons, for sustainability over time. We must have that foresight to keep doing that and keep pressing ahead, because those changes will make the difference over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. Councillor Cox.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for everyone's comments so far on this particular item. Clearly, we've got a big challenge ahead of us here for the Sunshine Coast to become a zero net sort of emissions organisation by 2041. Clearly, you know, we've had many discussions with Councillor Law about this, and we'd like to see that reduced in time, but it's about going through a process and understanding the costs, what those costs will be to our community, as well as the sort of financial risks that are associated with any sort of brought forward of any date. I really like the report. I think we're sort of definitely starting to embed some of these high-level discussions in our policies, bringing it back into the organisation structure through procurement and decision-making. I think that is a really smart way to go. Clearly, Councillor Hungerford touched on some of the emissions reduction planning and waste being one of our real sort of focuses, because most people may not know, but about 72% of all of our organisational emissions footprint comes from the community waste. And so Council's already made some tough decisions about introducing the garden organics service, which commences in a few short months. But we've got a real challenge here with the Sunshine Coast population continually growing. Those emissions keep growing. So we need to make those decisions. If we're going to get to a net zero, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. Obviously, you touched on the food organics, which will hopefully be brought in the next couple of years. So there's some of the high-level stuff, and then Gillian, you spoke in your presentation about the expansion of the rooftop solar, the upgrading of the street lights to more efficient LEDs, and obviously the fleet vehicles going into electric and hybrid sort of vehicles. So, look, I think we're on the right track. Obviously, we're in this process. We've got phase one with the framework sort of underway, and hopefully by the end of May we will have that further report. So I'm really looking forward to that. So thank you, and I'll be supporting this here today.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Look, I would rise also to support the motion. Thank you, Gillian, for the presentation. But I have a couple of questions. I watched the program on the ABC last night. I don't know whether anyone saw that, about some of the challenges around carbon credits, given our interests in blue carbon and the sequestration of carbon generally, which I encourage you to go and have a look at on ABC iView, because it does demonstrate, you know, some of the pluses and minuses and the arguments that are going on. And for us, it's about being sure that the programs and projects we decide to fund, you know, truly do deliver a better outcome in terms of carbon storage. So my question is, and I know, you know, we like to think of ourselves as a council who leads rather than follows, but just to better understand how we stand with some of our contemporaries in South East Queensland, if I think about, you know, not necessarily the full range of actions we're currently undertaking, but things like our solar farm, our coastal hazard adaptation strategy, the continual advancement and procurement of land in our conservation estate, the introduction of FOGO, which has been discussed and is coming up soon, the work we're doing around the Blue Heart carbon farm, and of course the work we're doing with our nomination for the UNESCO Biosphere. How does that place us amongst our contemporaries as a way of, I guess, providing encouragement to our community that Council is already thinking about a lot of these initiatives?
You wanted to come?
Well, thank you. That's fine.
Thanks, Joel.
Through you, Mr Mayor, look, some fantastic questions there. Look, there is no doubt that Queensland and a number of councils across South East Queensland are on a very similar journey to what we are today. In regard to the Coastal Hazard Adaptation Strategy, you know, that was an initiative that was put to us and led by the state government and LGAQ, and is rolled out across all coastal Queensland councils. Yeah, that said, we're incredibly proud of the Coastal Hazard Adaptation Strategy that our team prepared and was endorsed here last year, and is indeed providing providing some fabulous direction towards the development of the new planning scheme. It's been put to us that our coastal hazard adaptation strategy is leading the way and providing a guidance and template to the quality and standard of documentation that others are taking note of. So I think we're very well placed in that space. Look, in regards to biosphere, we are well down the path and eagerly anticipating UNESCO decision come June, July this year as to whether we are successful in our biosphere nomination. And again, we're eagerly awaiting that announcement. Noosa Council to our north and the Great Sandy region are existing biosphere areas, and if we should be successful, which I absolutely hope that we are, it'll put us in good stead to be probably one of the few places in the world where there are 3 biosphere regions in a row. But beyond that, I'm not aware of any other bids or initiatives from within Queensland or Australia at the moment. So certainly the approach that we're taking around biosphere to ensure a balance and to be that check and balance and third-party accreditation of our aspirations to be Australia's most sustainable region is a really important activity that we're working our way through at the moment. Look, in regards to the Blue Heart, when we announced the Blue Heart in 2019, the partnership between ourselves, the state government and Unity Water, we certainly put it out there as the first of its type initiative within Australia from that partnership opportunity. There are similar initiatives underway in other states, South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales. But look, as far as a multifaceted floodplain management outcome, and we've seen the absolute value of the natural floodplain during the recent rain events, where there were significant volumes of water stored on that floodplain and slowly released into the Maroochy River system to minimise the impact downstream. It absolutely came into its own and it acted as it should have. But I think the value and the difference for the Blue Heart is that it's bringing in the community access, the blue carbon opportunities that you've referred to, Mr Mayor, and really showcasing a part of the Sunshine Coast on our residential doorstep, which is going to be an amazing community asset for many years to come. And so we're certainly in a leading space in that instance. And probably on FOGO, so the food organics, garden organics, we have aspirations of having our FOGO service in place within sort of 3 years' time. As was referred to, our garden organics service collection process is currently in the process of being expanded. We've currently got about 40,000 residents who have a garden organics bin, and in the last 2 months, about another 50,000 letters and emails have gone out to our residents advising that a garden organics bin is coming their way. And we're certainly receiving a very positive response to that, with probably at this point in time lower than anticipated number of properties seeking exemption from that service being in place. So by July, we would anticipate that we'll have probably somewhere between 85 to 90,000 residents with a garden organics bin operating on the Sunshine Coast, and that will be an incredible outcome for this region. And as was referred to, 72% of our emissions come from our landfills, which is both organisation and community waste, and a significant proportion of that is coming from garden organics and food scraps. So by 2025, we absolutely hope that the food organics component will be in play, and we are in conversation with the state government about how we bring that in line as soon as we possibly can.
Thank you.
Mr Mayor, just some examples. I hope that sort of provides a reasonable update of where we're at. I certainly think that there are a number of other jurisdictions or councils that are probably doing 1 or 2 of those things. I'm not aware of another local government in Queensland that is doing that full spectrum or suite of activities at the same time.
Thank you, Bill. Good response. If there are no further speakers, I'll go back to Councillor Suarez to close.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And thank you for that summary as well, Bill. I'd like to acknowledge Bill Hadrill and Warren Bunker, Dave Moore online, the Madam CEO for her support in bringing all of this forward, and Mr Mayor as well, you've always been behind the team on this as well. There's a lot of people probably watching online back in their offices who have also had a lot of involvement. So the acknowledgement in November wasn't empty words. We are are definitely doing something about it. It's not an empty promise to the community. It's not something that we've just put up and taken some PR about. We're actually doing the work. Gillian Smith has been, in her own words, banging on about this forever. She might get in trouble for that a bit later. Well, Gillian, from the discussion that has occurred today, it's obvious that you've got your support here. We are hearing you, we are listening, and we are responding. So well done on the report.
Thank you very much, Councillor Suarez. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Well done, Gillian. Councillors, we move to item 8.2, and I'd just like to make a statement. Councillors, I wish to notify you that I may have a declarable conflict of interest in item 8.2, development application for material change of use, resort complex, food and drink outlet, shops, function facility and bar, and operational works at 10 to 16 Brisbane Road on the 7-9 First Avenue, Mooloolaba, to be considered in today's meeting. The declarable conflict of interest may arise due to the fact that Dennis Wagner, a shareholder in K-Pat Property Proprietary Limited, which is the sole shareholder of K-Pat Mooloolaba Proprietary Limited, the latter of which is the applicant for the development. Dennis Wagner may be advantaged or disadvantaged by the decision which Council makes on this matter. While I have no personal interest in either of these entities, Mr Wagner volunteered to speak on the subject of airport developments at my campaign launch on the 12th of February 2016, given his family were at that time developing the Wellcamp Airport at Toowoomba. The then proposed expansion of the Sunshine Coast Airport was a priority being advanced by our council at the time. Mr Wagner is not a professional speaker, he's not paid for his services, and he provided his speech on an entirely voluntary basis. As such, it's not a reportable gift. Furthermore, this event occurred outside my relevant term as a councillor, which commenced on the 5th of April 2016, and therefore Mr Wagner's services do not constitute a prescribed conflict of interest within the context of the Local Government Act 2009. In addition, as previously notified to Council, I received the following electoral donations in 2012 from Andrew Stevens, who is the Managing Director of Project Urban Proprietary Limited. On the 3rd of January 2012, I received the donation of $380, and on the 3rd of February 2012, I received the donation of $570. The cumulative total of those donations is $950. Each of these electoral donations were received well outside my relevant term as a councillor and are therefore not a prescribed conflict of interest. Further, I note that when I notified Council of this interest at the ordinary meeting on the 22nd of July 2021 in relation to a different development application at Biwa, Council resolved that I could participate in the discussions and the decision relating to that matter. In relation to Mr Stevens' interest in the development application, which is the subject of Agenda Item 8.2, it is my understanding that Project Urban, of which Mr Stevens is the Managing Director, is the planning consultant to the applicant. I have no ongoing relationships with Mr Stevens, Project Urban or its associated entities beyond having received those electoral donations in 2012. On this basis, on the basis of what I've outlined today, I have formed the view that I can appropriately manage any conflict should it exist, and that I can impartially make a decision in the public interest on the matter which is the subject of Agenda Item 8.2. So I'll now ask the Deputy Mayor to take the chair so that Council may consider whether or not I may participate in the discussion and decision for Agenda Item 8.2.
I'd like to start by thanking the Mayor for his declaration, and councillors, as required by the, in accordance with Section 150 ES3BI of the Local Government Act 2009, I now call for a councillor to move that Councillor Jamieson either stay or leave the chamber for the duration of the discussion and decision on this matter. And councillors, should the majority decide that it is in the public interest for the councillor to stay in the meeting for the duration of this matter, reasons for this decision will need to be recorded in the minutes. So councillors, do I have a councillor to move that Councillor James's stay or not? Councillor O'Prey.
Stay at 1.6, thanks, Mr Deputy.
Could we just, for the sake of anybody online, read out the reason? So
the interest is considered to be sufficiently remote. I would say ridiculously remote. I've lost the line, I'm sorry. As to not unduly influence the impartiality of the councillor.
Thank you very much. Seconded, Councillor Cox. Any questions? I might, sorry, Councillor Natali.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. Just a question to the Mayor. When the sale of the Brisbane Road car park came up and KPAT was the preferred developer, you chose to declare an interest and actually remove yourself from the vote. What has changed from then to now?
The relevant period. So legislation has changed around the relevant period, and that is now outside that time frame.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Natali? Any other questions? Councillors, I have a question. Mayor Jameson, you made it absolutely clear that you had no further ongoing relationship with Project Urban. Could you give us the same reassurance with the Wagners that since that occurrence where he spoke in favour of airport operations, you've had no further or ongoing relationship of a business nature?
I'd start by saying originally I'd invited John Wagner to be the speaker. At the last minute, John wasn't able to come. Had John Wagner have come, he's not tied into KPAT, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Dennis very kindly stood up at the last minute to fill in that role, to talk about the airport, which the audience on the day found very interesting. I haven't had any ongoing relationships with the Wagner family in respect of this development, no.
Lovely, thank you, that answers my question. Councillors, any other questions? In that case, councillors, I'll put the motion to stay. That in accordance with 105 ES4 of the Local Government Act 2009, Councillor Jameson may participate in discussion. Sorry, I missed that one. It's the one. Yep. May participate in the meeting despite the councillor's conflict of interest in relation to item 8.2, including by voting on the item for the following reason, which was item 6. So, all in favour? So that's Councillor Landsberg, Councillor Cox, Councillor Natali, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Dixon, Councillor O'Prey, Councillor Suarez, Councillor Law, Councillor Babarowski. Those opposed, Councillor Hungerford. The motion is passed. I'll hand the chair back over to the Mayor. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. Councillors, we'll get on with the presentation, and I call on Danny Rundle to give us a presentation. Thanks, Danny.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good morning, councillors. Item 8.2 is a development application to obtain approval to develop the land for a resort complex, namely a 4.5-star hotel with a rooftop bar and street-level public parking, public plaza and shops at 10 to 16 Brisbane Road and 7 to 9 First Avenue, Mooloolaba. The land is currently under the ownership of Sunshine Coast Council, and so an external assessment team led by planning consultants Ethos Urban has been commissioned to carry out a full and independent assessment of the application against the Sunshine Coast Planning Scheme on Council's behalf. The external independent assessment team maintained carriage of all aspects of the assessment, including project management and the statutory application process steps, through the Planning Act and the Development Assessment Rules. The purpose of commissioning the independent assessment team was to ensure a necessary arm's length relationship between Council's role as the current property owner and Council's statutory obligation as assessment manager for the development applications made under the Planning Act. I'll now hand over to Ashley Everton from Ethos Urban, who will take you through his assessment and recommendations. And if you could please direct all questions directly through to Ashley.
Thank you. Welcome, Ashley.
Good morning, councillors. Today, through you, Mr Mayor, I'll be presenting item 8.2, which is the independent assessment and recommendations of a development application at the corner of First Avenue and Brisbane Road, Mooloolaba. As Danny mentioned, this application has been assessed by an independent assessment team, including myself from Ethos Urban, and a number of external experts from disciplines such as traffic, architecture, acoustics, landscape architecture, engineering, waste management, and lighting. We do have present today Phil Smith and Nathan Edwards, who are the expert architect and traffic engineers on the project, and if necessary they may answer any sort of detailed questions beyond my sort of scope. As mentioned, the subject site is located at the corner of First Avenue and Brisbane Road, Mooloolaba. It's the remaining section of the former at-grade open-air car park. The subject site has had a history of development proposals over it, most recently being the Abacus application over the site for a mixture of uses, including a public car park, retirement, aged care, multiple dwellings, supermarket. In 2018 or thereabouts, council elected to effectively split the site in two and undertake a public car park, multi-storey car park development adjoining the site, which has subsequently been developed. And this application relates only to the remaining parcel shown in red. The subject site is burdened by an easement along the southern boundary, which provides the adjoining public multi-storey car park access from Brisbane Road across the site itself. So the development application lodged by the applicant, KPAT, Mooloolaba and their consultants includes two components, being material change of use and operational works. The material change of use component is for a resort complex, or otherwise referred to as a hotel, 4.5 star hotel. Includes 182 short-term accommodation hotel rooms and a number of amenities and facilities located throughout the building. There are also other retail tenancies at ground level. And the other items sought for approval being food and drink outlets, shops, function facilities and bars, effectively just cover the facilities provided within the actual hotel main itself. The applicant has also sought approval for a development permit for operational works, for roadworks, landscaping, stormwater and earthworks. So it's a very comprehensive application, a significant amount of technical material, both from a use perspective, but also digging into the engineering components of the development itself. The applicant elected to undertake a front-loaded assessment process, whereby the initial pre-lodgement meeting was held 3 December 2020, and there were a number of subsequent formal meetings and also a number of smaller workshop meetings between technical representatives from the applicant and also the independent assessment team. Lodgement occurred in September of 2021. Even though there was a significant front-loading assessment process, our independent assessment team still sought additional information and changes to the proposal on 2 separate occasions through the submission of a information request dated 18 October 2021 and then a further advice notice on the 25th of January 2022. The State Department for Planning was also a referral agency for the application, just based on the size of the site and uses proposed. Their scope of assessment was really just dealing with sort of potential impacts, mitigations on public transport. Ultimately, the state to provide comments and information through the assessment process, but their official referral response had no requirements. So, moving through to the actual development itself in the built form, it takes a traditional podium plus tower format, whereby substantial works and improvements are located at the ground level, including an area to be used as a public plaza at the corner of First Avenue and Brisbane Road. Substantial improvements to the streetscape amenity through street trees, paving, a fairly large pedestrian crossing at the corner of First Avenue to prioritise pedestrian movements within this area between sort of key sites, i.e. The adjoining public car park. The hotel gains access from the Brisbane Road shared access easement, as I mentioned before, and that's also where the servicing for the development, porticoche for drop-offs, etc., for the hotel located. As mentioned, the development includes a podium component, which obviously includes the ground level, but also 2 stories above, which are used for car parking purposes. So on level 1, the car park includes 22 non-hotel car parks for the ground level retail tenancies and 43 hotel associated car parks. The design is sought to reduce the impacts of this car parking component to the public realm through the use of sort of intricate architectural screening and vertical landscaping and podium landscaping, as you can see through those images and cross-sections on the screen. Level 3 is where some of the I suppose more active uses for the use of hotel guests are located, such as a spa, gym area, play space for kids are located, and is where the hotel rooms themselves start and the tower form begins as well. These images provide perspectives, key perspectives along Brisbane Road, with the left being from the Esplanade looking back down in the southerly direction of Brisbane Road, and the other being effectively from the shared access driveway along the southern boundary of the site. The design itself includes one single tower form, but as you can potentially see through the articulation of the building and what the applicant has described as sort of bellowing sails, the design of the tower actually looks like smaller sub-towers in incremental items instead of one larger building bulk. Oops, sorry, I found the wrong one. And based on the adjoining multi-storey car park, the development has really been focused towards the Brisbane Road and First Avenue frontages to provide generous separation distances and improve the amenity of those hotel rooms themselves. This indicates the function facilities provided on level 12 and also the rooftop bar and amenities. The rooftop component is open to public use and falls under the prescribed rooftop facilities, which allows some facilities a lot above the maximum 45 metres above ground level height requirement. This slide provides an overview of the types of rooms, number of beds, room sizes provided by the development. They range in size from approximately 30 square metres up to 90 square metres, but the majority of which are below 45 square metres in size. They are all of a single bed. From our review of information relating to the rating scale for hotels, predominantly a typical 5-star hotel would have sort of minimum rooms of 35 square metres, but typically up to 42. Some of those rooms fall below that mark, so therefore the 4.5 star scale that's the applicant is looking to achieve. The scale rating and the hotel kind of component isn't actually an assessment benchmark directly within the planning scheme, but that information just provides some context of the room sizes proposed. So the majority of the key assessment considerations and benchmarks for this application are contained within the Mooloolaba Alexandria Headland Local Plan. The site is still referred to within that plan as one key site, which includes the adjoining multi-storey car park, and the provisions talk about a high-quality mixed-use development, achieving outstanding design, landscape and streetscape amenity, the provision of a community meeting space located at the corner of First Avenue, Brisbane Road, and then there are some increased provisions to the normal requirements regarding site cover and podium heights. And there are also other requirements in there about prioritising pedestrian amenity and movements along Brisbane Road and First Avenue, but in particular Brisbane Road as a major priority for the scheme. Other considerations in terms of site constraints and also the use constraints. Obviously, the design of the building took into account the interface with the adjoining multi-storey car park and really seeking to orientate hotel rooms away from the car park and more down towards Brisbane Road and the ocean itself. The single shared access way from Brisbane Road that will accommodate car parking into the site, servicing and the porta coach, and also the entry into the multi-storey car park. So it's important that that driveway functions well for the development itself, but also the adjoining car park facility. For this type of development, a coach set-down facilities are required, and also a porta coach. And there are requirements around the establishment of a transformer pad mount located within First Avenue, which had to be considered as part of the design to minimise impacts on the public realm that may occur. So that's sort of some of the key elements that the design sought to mitigate and work around within the application. Onto the car parking. So as I mentioned before, Level 1 provides an area for the non-hotel retail spaces or retail tenancies located at ground level. They are unrestricted in terms of there is no boom gates proposed to access those car parking spaces, as you can see in blue. The hotel parking is restricted through a boom gate and further management measures. This is because there's two main components to the application, one being the hotel, the rooms, guests and the facilities contained with the hotel, and the actual non-hotel ground level tenancies. So the car parking arrangement seeks to distinguish those two things. As you can see, the application assessed by our team actually complies with the planning scheme, and they are providing or required to provide 4 spaces in addition to the actual minimum requirements for each of the different development aspects. As you can see there, the additional unallocated 4 spaces. So they're providing more than what we've assessed as the minimum requirement under the planning scheme itself. The planning scheme doesn't provide a direct car parking rate for resort complexes, given the different types of facilities, scales, rooms and amenities that different types of resort complexes and hotels may provide. And it basically requires a user and locational assessment on the needs of the development in that locality. As part of the application material, the applicant provided a comparative analysis with other hotel, resort facilities, etc., of comparable standard and design to identify how many spaces were provided on a room basis. And as you can see there, the development's providing 1 space per 2.5 rooms, which is comparable with other developments that were assessed. It's noted that through the assessment process, the applicant's project traffic engineer provided information, and then that was also peer reviewed by another traffic engineer within the applicant's team, and then of course by our traffic engineer on our assessment team as well to comply with the scheme. So, as part of the development, there are substantial external works and upgrades occurring with the development. These include sort of streetscaping, provision of street trees, improved paving, and footpath widths along First Avenue and Brisbane Road. As I mentioned, the First Avenue pedestrian crossing has been sort of extended beyond the width of sort of a typical zebra crossing to really respond to the pedestrian movements occurring as part of the development, but also within the precinct more broadly. A First Avenue loading bay is proposed. The loading bay was proposed to be a public loading bay, but it will be used by the development for their coach set-downs occurring on site. Effectively, the planning scheme does talk to the provision of on-site servicing, including a bus set-down area on-site occurring as part of this development. However, there are other considerations within the scheme about how do those provisions actually practically roll out in terms of the interface and the design on the streetscape. And ultimately, as part of the assessment and the justification put forward by the applicant and assessed by our team, is that the provision of an on-site loading bay, for example, along Brisbane Road, would result in additional driveway crossings along Brisbane Road, potential pedestrian safety issues, and would also result in a diminished urban design outcome whereby the actual footpath is separated to the frontage of tenancies and buildings, so you wouldn't have that sort of activation occurring in that area. So that's why the loading bay is proposed where it is, and that's consistent with the previous Abacus approval over the site. So our recommendation contained within our reporting is to approve the application subject to reasonable and relevant conditions, and also within the package that's before you, there are some changes sought to some of the plans that they would require resubmission and assessment by council prior to formal approval of each plan. That's it.
Thank you very much, Nathan. So there's the officer recommendation, which I'll just give you a moment to read, I'm sure you have already. So if I could get someone to move that, I'd be grateful. Councillor Natali, thank you. A second? Can I just get a second at first, Councillor? Sorry.
That I've already provided.
Okay. Can we get those up on the screen, please? Someone prepared the second. Councillor Babarowski, thank you. Okay, so Councillor Natali, you might like to just explain your additional items.
Sure. Did you want me to read what those...
If you don't need to go through all the points,
okay.
But if you just want to speak to what you're proposing.
So obviously, you know, when the reports come to council, just some clarification in regards to the public art and how we could apply and what the actual dollar amount was. And I think the amendment to that condition 36 would suffice in being able to give much more clarity in regards to what that would be. The amendment of condition 39 about the driveway must be lined, marked and signed as no standing area. That driveway is a driveway into our park and go. The last thing we want is for vehicles to be stacking there. So it's important that we make sure that people just, if there is a problem getting into the porker shed, that you know, people just don't block that whole entrance, because it would just make it non-functional. And condition 40 is really about, I suppose, the ability to be able to have electric vehicles and having charging points somewhere within the actual building. It hasn't been obviously decided, but that will be part of the work that would enable at least clarity that we have to try and get these charging points somewhere within the parking area. The final condition is an additional condition, is about the bus sit-down area. And I'm more than happy to talk to councillors about my reasons for this. The car parking within the building, residents won't. People out there just don't and won't accept the fact that there is only 72 car parks for 182 hotel accommodation. But the fact is that there are consultants that are willing to back that up. So the fact there's only 2.5 car parks, one car park for every 2.5 hotel units, rooms. We need buses to come in. We need you know, the building to be able to function. And what I read is that there are codes in terms of the loading bay that doesn't meet the code. There's also the bus. It should be an on-site bus. Any hotel with 20 rooms or more must have their own bus sit-down area within their hotel complex. Now, obviously the constraint of the site makes it really difficult. And the fact that the consultant has identified that First Avenue provides that opportunity for buses to come in. And as we know, go to Melbourne Tunnel Marine, if you want to go to hotels, there's the big buses that will pick you up and take you. That could be the case in years to come, that we need to accommodate those buses that do the hotel drops. And we want this building to function. I'm not convinced, reading, that the loading bays will function properly, and I think it's necessary to have an additional loading bay capacity on public land. And obviously we need to make sure that buses can be accommodated there within the complex. And if it can't, then my statement here is really, my resolution is about a payment in lieu. And that payment in lieu is really to be able to help facilitate a private development, get over the line. And in the public's view is that it is some aspect of being able to justify allowing First Avenue to be used. Now, it was the applicant that actually put that forward, not council officers, to solve the problem that they had, unable to have sufficient land and unable to accommodate the bus. So, you know, we as the public giving public land, we're not selling it to them, we're allowing them to use this to be able to facilitate, you know, the necessary component of the building being able to work the loading facilities and the bus sit there. And I don't think it's unreasonable to be able to put a charge, because if they can't, as we know with other developments, if we can't put a charge, if they can't provide the car parking, there are car parking rates where those rates are applied. And in this case, it's 15 metres. I've spoken to the parking manager, and he said that that's the equivalent of 3 car parking bays. That's where the figure comes in.
Thank you, Councillor Natali. So I gather what you were saying, Councillor, is providing those amendments are agreed by Council, you're satisfied to be the mover of the approval. Thank you. I'm going to go to Councillor Suarez.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor, I just have a few questions. The amendment that you've put forward, Councillor Natali, condition number 36, 39 and 40, this information was provided in response to some information that councillors have raised. That's correct, actually?
That's correct.
And these words are actually words that are being provided by Ethos Urban as proposed amendments that could be made?
That's correct.
Yeah. So condition 43 is the only additional one to the information request that we had. However, I note in attachment 5, which is page 6 of 18 of your report, or page 12 of 25 of our agenda papers, regarding the proposed loading bay on First Avenue Road Reserve, the response was that the applicant has proposed to construct a loading bay within the road reserve of First Avenue along with other streetscape improvements. So I'm not quite understanding what the applicant's proposing and what Joe's putting forward in the condition. Are they the same thing or are they different matters?
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think what Councillor Natali is, in terms of where the loading bay is located and what we've described within our documentation is the same. It's the same bay. The difference is obviously the second component in terms of the financial in lieu. Does that clarify?
Thank you. It does a little bit. So essentially, in the report, the applicant would be providing that facility for the public, the loading bay facility, and updating streetscaping. And what Councillor Natali is putting forward in terms of condition 43 is to provide that as well as a financial contribution. Correct? Okay. Sorry, Joe, Councillor Natali, can I just ask you to explain why you're asking for both? I'm just not understanding why you're asking for both.
Well, I'm actually asking them to actually put their bus facility within their property. If they can't do that, they pay in lieu. So the fact is that the land belongs to the public. And if they had to purchase this land to be able to make and put a bus facility, they would have to purchase the land and still build the capability of that bus set down area within their own development. They can't do that. And if they can't do that, then the community, as far as I believe, should get something in return in facilitating their development and the capability of their hotel being able to operate the way it should operate. The consultant makes it very clear that because we are facilitating this, he's quite happy to tick off on the loading bay and the bus set down, even though it doesn't meet our codes, because there is a loading bay being proposed by the developer on public land. And I believe that it's an appropriate thing for the public to expect that if we're going to facilitate a private development to happen and be able to function the way that we will want it to function, to be able to use public land, that they build that facility, they don't get exclusive rights to it, but they also make a financial contribution to enable us to be able to facilitate that. and hopefully then council doesn't go and change that and create something else, because I would hate to think that we'd have a hotel that just can't function. And so in the spirit, I think, of being able to facilitate this development, get it over the line, I believe that it's a small ask and something that we could justifiably say to the community that we stood up. And this money, I'm saying, should be used for streetscape works in First Avenue. If you have a look at the back of Cyrenus, it is the back of a building. It's not very attractive. And I'm hoping that with some streetscape works that we can improve that visibility for those people that will be coming off that bus set down area. So, you know, the money will be used in Nexus in terms of that development within that area. That's the anticipation and the reason I put that here.
Thank you, Councillor Tolley. Yes, Councillor Suarez.
I just have two more questions, Mr Mayor. The bus set down area, would that be publicly accessible, or is it for the sole use of the hotel?
It is a publicly accessible loading bay.
No, the bus set down.
The bus set down
Is the loading bay?
Is the loading bay.
Right, okay.
That's correct.
Sorry, excuse me. What would be, are you able to tell me what the financial contribution would be that is equal to 3 car parks?
I think at this time I don't have that information available. We were made aware sort of last night. I'm not
Can you
sure.
answer that, Danny?
Danny has anything to speak to.
Through you, Mr Mayor. So it's something that would have to be worked out based on land value, but based on previous experience, we're sort of looking maybe in the order of $45,000 to $50,000 per parking space.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Suarez. Councillor Hungerford.
Through you, Mr Mayor. With this one here, Ethos Urban have used Planning Act 2016 and Sunshine Coast Plan 2014 to assess this application, correct?
That's correct.
And you've put the provisions of those in your conditions?
That's correct.
Correct. Now we come down to the reasonable and relevant test. I've read enough planning in the court judgments and judges' assessments on the decisions and the reasons why to see the reasonable and relevant test is all important. It's got to be fair and reasonable imposition on the development in the case. So I'm happy to look at these as long as I know they've got rigour and would stand up in court with rigour, because I do not want to waste the ratepayers' time and funds on something that doesn't have rigour. The first one that concerns me is condition 36. A public art contribution must be provided by the developer to a minimum dollar value of 0.025% of the construction budget for the development. For example, a construction budget of $100 million would require provision of public art to a minimum dollar value of $250,000. That's $250,000. I'd just like to get an opinion on the fair and relevance of asking that to the developer and whether that would have rigour if he did end up in court.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Since we received that question, the original condition includes aspects regarding the preparation of a public art master plan, and the additional part of the condition is regarding the financial contribution. We went away and looked at other similar developments within sort of similar sort of centre areas, and the inclusion of the financial contribution component has been an aspect that council has applied in similar developments in similar localities. On that basis, I'm comfortable that it is a reasonable and relevant condition and something that's been applied previously by council.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that for my own interest. The next one is condition 43A. Provide a bus set-down area within the property boundaries of development site. Now we're looking here at performance outcome 15. Performance outcomes have to be achieved, where the acceptable outcomes are nice to achieve if you can. What concerns me here is all provide a financial contribution equal to 3 car parks in lieu using the Mooloolaba car parking rates, and we've just had establishment there of about what that should be. But the next part from the fair and relevant is and further the total amount be used towards any council nominated streetscape projects in First Avenue. My understanding is if money is collected for a purpose in lieu of, it has to be used for a similar purpose. To then divert the funds to streetscaping rather than provision of car parking, I'd have a bit of concern there, but I'm open to having professional opinion on that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I probably would prefer, we could talk about that aspect, but probably more broadly about the financial component to it. In my opinion, that wouldn't satisfy the reasonable test under the Planning Act in terms of it imposing an unreasonable imposition of development. The reasons associated with that is that the loading bay, by its nature in terms of how it is governed, would be a publicly available facility located on public land. Yes, the hotel would use it for infrequent bus set-downs associated with the hotel, but it probably wouldn't be the predominant use of the loading bay throughout a standard day. The loading bay provisions and the detail that would be determined by council's operational staff would be around loading for service vehicles for 20 minutes, drop down, set down of passengers for 2 minutes, etc. would apply to the general public and not just the hotel itself. I think from an operational perspective, there might be an issue regarding whether the hotel would therefore feel that they do have some sort of preferential sort of access to that loading bay, even though that wouldn't be the case in terms of how it would be sort of enforced by council. In terms of the reasonable and relevance tests and the assessment benchmarks under the scheme, yes, it is noted that it does not comply with the applicable acceptable outcomes, and you've mentioned also the performance outcomes. That isn't the extent of the assessment tests within the planning scheme or under the Planning Act. Where the development is deemed to comply with the performance outcomes of the scheme, this instance talk about the provision of safe servicing that can also be used by others, and the safe and the use by others it would deem to be complied with in terms of the facility that can be used more than just the hotel itself. Also within the structure of the planning scheme and the development rules, where there is a perceived conflict between certain provisions of the scheme, there's a hierarchy order, and the provisions within the local plan that talk about promoting pedestrian movements, activation, good streetscape outcomes actually sit higher than the transport code. And from my perspective and our team's perspective, the provision of an on-site coach bay may actually impede on complying with those provisions of the local plan in regards to those activation measures and pedestrian movement. You would have additional driveway crossovers along First Avenue. Also, the actual development frontage facade itself would have to be set back quite a distance from the actual footpath alignment, which effectively wouldn't comply with those elements of the local plan. So where there is a conflict or competing interest within planning scheme provisions, you can deem an application to comply and be approved, whereby you are resolving an instance of conflict, and there's a clear hierarchy of those provisions. So from my perspective, the provision of the loading bay does comply with the planning scheme, and therefore this requirement on an application that has been deemed to comply with the planning scheme would therefore be unreasonable.
On that answer, I take it 36 would be past the reasonable and relevant test, and 43A would not. So I'd be asking Councillor Natoli to consider removing 43 to gain my support, and if the other stacks up, I'm happy to support it, but not where you've got one there that doesn't meet the relevant test. I ask you whether you would consider removing 43A to gain support for your motion.
Out of this whole development application, this is the one part here that I've really struggled with. One, because we have to put, or because the development has satisfied their requirements in terms of being able to make their loading bay and bus set down work, they need First Avenue. Compromises the landscaping provisions, compromising the public in the fact that we have to all-weather cover in that street's compromised. So, you know, it does meet the planning scheme provisions in terms of having a loading facility there. But what if we said no? If we said no, that we won't support that, or I'm trying at the moment to find another location for the taxi rank in Mooloolaba. This is a perfect location. What if we decide to do that and a hotel doesn't get a bus set down or additional loading facilities there? How does that then go back to the report where you realise that they've got some issues there and it doesn't meet? Just because we are allowing this at the point.
So I'm prepared to give him the opportunity. He's trying to explain his rationale, and I'm prepared to allow him to continue, but you might try.
So you know, for me to justify in being able to go down this path and stand up to the public and say, look, I've supported this building and I've supported these aspects on a basis that there will be a contribution made and it will go to landscaping and streetscaping that will benefit this hotel. You know, I believe it is relevant because we have compromised the landscaping and streetscaping on First Avenue because of this.
I think you've answered Councillor Hungerford's question. Thank you. The word is no.
Yes. It would have been quite simple in the first place. On that, I'll speak to this. I'm happy to look at things where they're reasonable and relevant. Like I said before, I don't want to tie up ratepayers' funds and time and resources and employing barristers on things that aren't fair and relevant, that aren't likely to hold up in Planning Environment Court. We get tied up in a lot of court cases and it churns up a lot of money. If we're going to put things in here, and that's why I asked the questions, if it's fair and relevant and I believe it has legs, happy to support it. But where something doesn't have legs, I see that as a waste of time and resources. Well, I'm saying I will not support this. If another councillor wants to move an amendment, that's fine. But on the current basis here at the moment, if this stands the way it is at the moment, I'm not going to put the ratepayers through that time and expense unnecessarily.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll go to Councillor Babarowski.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, I certainly decided to second this to give an experienced local councillor the opportunity to explain the amendments to the conditions, and I thank him for doing his job, essentially, as the local councillor. I too basically wanted to hear the officer response on whether each of these would be deemed to be reasonable and relevant. I have to say, Councillor Natoli, that 43A was a question in my mind too, because of the non-exclusive use of it, and therefore you'd end up in an argument about whether they should, you know what I'm talking about. And I think that's been explained, that that would be hard. So to some extent, I'm in a difficult position now because, councillors, I wanted to fully support 36, the percentage for art. It was a question I raised in the information sessions. Could we scope the public art master plan and put a value to it? And I haven't heard a response that nailed that. My only concern when I saw your condition was that it was actually undercooking it at 0.25. As I think Councillor Natoli knows, percentage for art schemes have existed for decades. In fact, the first one was in 1937 in the UK at 2%. Any project above a certain value. Western Australia has a 1% over when a capital value is over 2 million. So this is incredible. And Queensland had a percentage for an art scheme at 1% over a certain value about a decade ago. And most of the public art that you see in the CBD areas is a result of that program. So it's a very good concept, and in fact, to some extent, I regret not specifying that for our region overall, but I think it's a very reasonable start, probably too modest, but I'm willing to support that, because at least it quantifies it. But on 43A, I now have a question in my mind, and I, again, a bit like Councillor Hungerford, for the sake of the expert advice that you've received on whether that 43A is a reasonable and relevant condition that they could defend, you wouldn't be doing that, they would be. I'd ask you to reconsider 43A.
Thank you, Councillor Babarowski. We go to Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, look, I was also going to raise that question in relation to precedence with Condition 36, and thank you, Mr. Everton, for your response there about previous approvals by council that have demonstrated that success. I just wanted to thank you personally for the additional information that you've provided us throughout the week since last Monday. I think the report that we've had, as well as the additional information from both yourself and the supporting sort of consultants, has given me a lot of confidence in the rigour that's been put through this particular development application. We all know that this site has had a long and checkered history, dating back to sort of the late 90s. So it's actually quite exciting to be standing here today looking at the report for recommendations to support the approval, given its long and checkered history. So it's quite an exciting step for Mooloolaba. I know that there was a lot of questions put forth to the team last week in relation to the design, and I noted that Mr. Smith from Mango Architects actually said that by his assessment, although the design is well considered and of a reasonably high local standard, he still had some questions about it. But when I read through the conditions 17 to 26, I was quite comfortable with where we've ended up. Obviously, there's been a vast improvement from the original application that was lodged to where we are now. I think there's been some significant developments in that space. So I commend the applicant actually for moving forth with that design to the standard that it's now at. And speaking of design, I think that we all need to understand the fact that yes, this is nominated as a key site in Mooloolaba, but in my opinion, it's a secondary site. It's not on the Mooloolaba Esplanade, which is like the AREA development and some of the others. It is a key site, yes, but it is a secondary site in my opinion, and so I think the processes that have been underway and the rigour that's been behind some of that assessment has landed us at a very good spot. I also just wanted to make a point that hotels are definitely needed. I know that council and the mayor have strongly advocated for more hotels on the Sunshine Coast since probably the inception of the Regional Economic Development Strategy in 2013, I should say. So here we are, obviously with the announcement of the Olympic and Paralympic Games in 2032. This will be a key facility in that coming decade. And finally, I just wanted to express some concerns in relation to condition number 43, like Councillor Hungerford and Babarowski have mentioned. Based on the conversations that have just taken place in the chamber just now, I've got some concerns that that one obviously passes that fair and relevance test. And so I probably won't be supporting the amendment as it's been displayed, but would just like to foreshadow that I will move. Yep. That's correct, sorry, Councillor. So I will foreshadow that I will move an alternate if this one doesn't get success, removing condition number 43 as has been determined up on screen.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor O'Prey.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'd like to concur with what Councillor Cox has said. This is an exciting day. This has had a long and checkered history, and this is another hotel coming to the Sunshine Coast. This is exciting. For 10 years, 20 years, it's been very difficult to get a one-night stay in Mooloolaba. In fact, I doubt you could even get it now in peak season, maybe even on a weekend. It's very difficult to get a one-night stay in Mooloolaba, and this will certainly rectify that situation. Councillors, I'd like to remind us all that if there's 3 or 4 councillors that have already said they're concerned with 43A, we've all got the right to make an amendment right now on the floor. I just want to remind you that this is a motion. It's been put forward before the offer's recommendation, so we can actually make an amendment right now on the floor. And I too, and I'll be guilty of charge as well, as I have concerns over this, particularly the fact that we're going to take money out of a transport or parking issue and put it into landscape and streetscaping. I've got concerns there. I think it should go back into management of traffic, parking facilities, same sort of thing, rather than going into beautifications and streetscaping. I will support this today. I'm on the fence with 43A, but I will support it. I think it's a great day. I think it's a great opportunity. And like I said, this is a wonderful opportunity for not only the drive market, but the fly market. The fly market now is going to come out of Sydney and Melbourne, stay one night in Mooloolaba and head home the next day. And there's an opportunity for them to do that now. So I think this is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity. The only negative that I can pull out of this is that, albeit not part of the planning scheme, is the difference between a 4.5-star and a 5-star hotel. For 10 years we've been talking about this site, and we've mentioned it being a 5-star hotel 1,000 times over. And of course we cannot control whether it can be a 4.5-star or a 5-star hotel, but this region deserves and needs a 5-star hotel in Mooloolaba, particularly as Councillor Cox mentioned, with the 2032 Olympics on the cusp in the 10-year plan. It's disappointing that it's not going to go to a 5-star hotel. But that said, I'm going to support the motion today, and I wish them all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Prey. Councillor Hungerford, you've got a question?
I'll move an amendment with the deletion of 43A.
Someone to second? Councillor Cox. Do you want to speak further to it, Councillor?
Like I said before, I'm happy to support amendments where they have substance and they are fair and relevant. We've clearly heard the answer here that one doesn't meet that test. So why keep Councillor Natoli has been asked a couple of times whether he'd be happy to remove that, but he's stubbornly saying no. So to move this forward, I move this so we can move forward, because I'm happy to support the things that have substance, but not the things that haven't. So I'm doing on that basis to move this forward and stop the meeting dragging on. Let's make that decision.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak to the amendment? No? Okay, we'll put the amendment to the vote. Those in favour?
Mr Mayor, just a moment. Before we do, if we're voting on this now, this is the final vote, is that correct?
No,
this is just a vote on the amendment, then we go back to Thank you.
Councillor, no, you were waiting for somebody else.
Thank you.
So those who support the amendment of removing 43A? Those opposed? The motion's carried. Okay, so 43A comes out. So you now have the motion, the amended motion, Councillor Hungerford. But there are a couple of other speakers I know. I don't know whether that changes.
I'm happy to let them go first.
Okay. Well, let Councillor Law, you've been waiting patiently. Thank you.
Thank you, through Mr Mayor. A couple of questions, if I may. The life expectancy of this building in a significant and/or landmark place in the most attractive part of the Sunshine Coast, we want a really good outcome. On page 14 of the presentation, it mentions that at a landmark location like this, we should have an outstanding building. Are you able to agree that we are going to achieve an outstanding building with the proposal as it is, the application in this form?
Through you, Mr Mayor. Not to dance around that question directly, but it is slightly more complex. The scheme provides requirements that talks to achieving an outstanding building design, landscaping, streetscaping, etc. in public realm. So it is more than just the individual building component itself. And the outstanding building design has been definitely an item that we've been working with the applicant for a long period of time. The assessment benchmarks within the scheme, where if there isn't strict compliance achieving an outstanding building design, the overall outcomes talk about a high quality design, which in some thinkings that's probably a lower benchmark than the original outstanding building design. The assessment provided by the assessment team identified that the building doesn't clearly demonstrate an outstanding building design. However, through the imposition of conditions which were mentioned before, 17 to 20 something, effectively the provision of additional detail provided within the development through the design progression phase, and ensuring that that information is provided back to council for review against the actual approval to demonstrate that finer grained detail has occurred through that design progression stage would satisfy the requirement of an outstanding building outcome.
Okay, so thank you for that. And if I take that a little bit further and consider the Green Building Council of Australia requirements, which the intent of that organisation, it's an independent organisation, it goes a long way, I believe, to helping non-technical people understand what we're getting. I haven't found anywhere in the reports, in the recommendations, that there is any effort to achieve a rating under the Green Building Council of Australia. And I haven't found anything either that speaks to the National Australian Built Environment Rating System. And I've selected those two specifically because the building that Council is putting up in Maroochydore CBD has achieved, I believe, 5-star ratings on both of those scales. We've got a building here that is not even mentioning or giving thought to those scales. And we wish to be Australia's most sustainable region. So have I simply not found it in the report, or is it not being considered by the application?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The specific requirements for Green Star rating and the other organisation rating that you mentioned isn't a direct assessment benchmark within the planning scheme that requires direct compliance. Items surrounding building efficiency, whereby it being building materials, lighting, etc., are handled under separate legislation which occurs after the development approval process to demonstrate how sustainability and building efficiency measures have been provided. The applicant provided a National Construction Code Section J report that talks to how those provisions of that subsequent approval process are being met over the overall development itself. So the requirement for council to impose specific compliance with a Green Star isn't directly located within the assessment benchmarks that we assess the application against, so it is limited in what we can draw to within the conditions.
Okay. So based on my own experience of using many hotels across the country, every room will have a balcony, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so therefore every room will have a door or window that will open so that there is a potential to get fresh air?
Yes.
Okay, well that's something. And I do agree that we need a hotel of this quality in terms of a star rating quality, not necessarily a Green Star or Neighbours quality, so that's okay. But I'm really struggling with the overall concept of this, where we've got an applicant who is sort of just holding back and really not taking a lead on a significant investment in our community, in an area in our community that the council is investing huge amounts of money, and they're just not giving it to us. So, Mr. Mayor, if I just talk to the motion.
Sure.
In its current form. For me, this is about the bigger picture, not the fine detail that I thank our colleagues for taking us to. I just remain deeply concerned that Australia's most sustainable region is not insisting that a landmark hotel is going to achieve easily recognisable standards of providing a building that will be energy efficient, that will be thinking about zero carbon emissions, that will consider how it will shade and cool the frontages and the sides of the buildings to make it a really pleasant space for the guests to come to. I see that we have added in here that we will seek retrofitting of electrical vehicles charging stations. If someone was looking to the future life of their building, surely they would have that in up front, which again speaks to the lack of interest from this organisation in providing a high quality building that will look to the future. And I'm just really struggling with that. I have a sense that our planning scheme, the Sustainable Planning Act, is really letting us down as well. And obviously we can't hold anyone accountable for that, but people will, and this is being demonstrated, are just achieving just enough to get by and get a tick and be able to carry on. We've spoken earlier today about being a leader and providing Australia's most sustainable region. And for me, this isn't that at all. It's a hotel. We need hotels. It's a 4 or 5 star hotel. We absolutely need that. But we're putting it in the place on the coast that this council is investing heavily over the years, and in the coming years we will be investing significant funds to create a brilliant experience for the tourists who are coming. And in this form, we're letting them down. We're not giving them the best experience that they might want to have for Australia's most sustainable region. So on that basis, it's I suspect there's not much we can do, and I might ask the CEO, is there anything that can be done, given that I believe we're still the owners of the land, that we can insist that the people who want to develop significant buildings in a significant part of the coast achieve significant standards on our behalf so that we truly can achieve our vision. So sorry for just sort of adding a question into my remarks, but at the moment, as this stands, I'm not happy to support this because I would like the applicant to go back and provide us something that we can all be really proud of. Thank you, and I don't know if the question is acceptable for the CEO to take.
Thank you, Councillor Law.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I might ask Warren Bunker, who's the Group Executive at the moment for our planning area, to answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bunker.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think there's two questions. One is you're currently sitting as the planning assessors, and that's the hat you have, and you're assessing it against the planning scheme. And this is the assessment that has been done in relation to that. It's fair to say the planning scheme was adopted in 2014, and quite a few things have occurred since that time. And obviously, as part of a new planning scheme, we've hoped to take it to another level in relation to that. So I think in terms of that, this is an assessment against that scheme. You either believe it is an assessment that meets those requirements or it doesn't in relation to it. In terms of being the owner, obviously that's a different hat, and we may actually be able to use that hat to talk to the developer in relation to it and suggest other things, but using that hat, not this hat, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Councillor Landsberg.
Thank you. Through the Chair, just a question, if I may. Just a comment made by the officer previously about the value of the car parks, and I was under the impression, is that a cost on the land value or the loss of the parking spaces? Because I was, in terms of average prices across the coast, for a loss of car park is much lower than the quote that you made, I believe.
Daniel. Through you, Mr. Mayor. So, so that figure that I've provided is just something that I'm aware of on a couple of other applications in the past. As I said, it's something that would need to be looked at with our other teams in council and the value of the land. I understand that it does include the value of the land as well as the construction value.
Thank you. And Councillor David just brought up an item that I was actually going to touch on in terms of the future needs to retrofit for charging stations. And obviously there would be loss of several car parks during that stage of that charging time frame that it takes. Would that need upgrading to obviously the electrical, like the transformers, to obviously retrofit and install that facility?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I believe it would. In terms of that condition, that was a condition in terms of sort of consistency and where we're moving, thinking about those facilities. That was included on the adjoining public parking station as well, that those facilities weren't provided at day dot, but provision was required to demonstrate how those things could occur when there is enough market force to do those things. But yes, some accommodation would be required.
Okay, thank you. Look, of the opinion that we've already been informed that we probably need 8 to 9 4 to 5 star accommodation developments on this coast, on the Sunshine Coast, before 2032. I'll be supporting this today, and I look forward to support from my fellow colleagues as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Landsberg. Councillor Babarowski.
Councillor Desai rise to enthusiastically remind us what's been achieved here. Yes, we've needed to debate some of the amendments to the conditions and some of the details, but let's remind ourselves that we have, I think, significantly contributed to an outstanding design outcome. And I think it's in part down to the review process that we included in the assessment with the peer review. And to some extent, I think we should remind ourselves that this is a very important form of leadership in built form. I think we should be very pleased with the outcome in terms of the built form. And I did want to just check that, I did ask this question in the information sessions, that we're not at any risk of it being value engineered down to a lesser standard. So could I just get you to answer that in terms of value engineering, we are going to hold on the design standards that we should be very proud of. And I'll continue if I may.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes. Conditions 17 through to 26 effectively include a significant amount of detail that the development will need to demonstrate to council as it moves through that next process of approvals, i.e. building approval. Sometimes when applications do move through those steps, some elements do fall away, etc. So the information and the conditions really kind of try to nail it to the wall in terms of the materials that are provided, providing perspectives of that building approval outcome. How does that compare to what was approved within the development approval? So we've sought to provide as much rigour within those conditions to ensure that value engineering doesn't occur, and if anything, it goes the other way and more fine-grained detail is included within the development itself.
Thank you for that. I'm personally reassured that I think we understand how important that is. Just a little bit of a development of that, because I did ask about the integrated lighting design of the building. We've got a lovely form here, and I suggested that we needed to have a lighting strategy or a lighting plan that would really make sure we take advantage of that form, particularly at night when generally everything else drops out and you can take advantage of that. Did we make any significant progress on that front?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The development application seeks approval for certain aspects of operational works, lighting of which was not included within the development application. Information regarding internal lighting, how that operates, ensuring that there aren't impacts on adjoining neighbours, etc., that was provided, but information sort of more external to the site and within the public realm, that information hasn't been provided and is subject to additional approvals and assessment. We have provided some, I suppose, base level requirements regarding street lighting, LEDs, that sort of thing, but probably the level of information that you're speaking to is probably another layer.
Thank you for that answer. I just encourage us to stay focused on that as any opportunity in further assessments or operational works applications, just let's try and encourage them to take advantage of the quality of their own design. I'm sure that they'll be aware that there's an advantage to them in making sure that this building literally does stand out and has a very good lighting design. So having said that, again, I am very pleased that this council went through a process that took maximum advantage of a peer review process to look at the architectural design. I think that it is outstanding. I love the fact that the team wanted to push even further on the originality of the design, but I do think that we've landed on a very good outcome, and I'm very pleased to support it and ask councillors to support this amended recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Babrowski. Councillor Suarez.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll speak to the motion. I'd like to congratulate Councillor Natali for bringing the original amendment to Council. I think the three remaining amendments will make this a better application in the long run. I also would like to echo Councillor Law's comments about what expectation we should have here on the Sunshine Coast. And I remember having a discussion with one of the planning staff who said something that has stuck with me, which was, we have premium product here on the Sunshine Coast. People want to come here, and we shouldn't be selling our land or selling our space to the lowest bidder. So through the conditions, in terms of prior to having any building work commence, detailed architectural plans and perspectives must be prepared and submitted to council. I would encourage the applicant and I would encourage council officers to work well together to provide a good outcome from the region and not provide a suboptimal development, because it is, as Councillor Law said, a premium site, and we are a premium product and we should be delivering on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Suarez. Councillor Natali.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Obviously this would have been an application I, as a local councillor, would have loved to have moved and had it approved. No doubt, from the very beginning, the design elements of the building has improved, the articulation of the building. It is by far a much more attractive building. The fact that you've been able to move the actual function room up to level 12, considering where it was, and I think that will work so much better with the rooftop garden in terms of functionality of the hotel itself. There's a lot of good things about this development. Don't get me wrong. A lot of things about this development that I like, but there are some aspects, as reading the report, that were personally a disappointment, because I thought we have a landmark site, and we just could have, with the willingness of the developer, maybe achieved a much better outcome. And not having been involved in that directly with discussions with the developer and much more difficult process, I suppose, not having the staff that we talk to, the opportunity to be able to have that input and work through some of those key design aspects often can, those discussions can end up allowing a progression when we have a better understanding of where and the reasons why a push-pull situation happens within the development itself. I wasn't aware that the loading dock and the bus set down were not compliant until I read the report. How do we go about talking about and satisfying my requirements in terms of where I felt? It would have been more appropriate to have had a discussion with the developer about an infrastructure agreement that could have been signed off and hopefully delivered with this application, with the willingness and understanding of having those discussions and working through that process. But we didn't have time. do we defer this and allow us that opportunity? As of Friday, it could be a deemed approval, and we don't have time to do that. So I sort of feel like I'm pushed back. And here, in terms of outcomes, we look at previous developments that have been involved with non-compliance and things, and those discussions with developers have ended up with outstanding outcomes. Seaforth is a classic example of an outstanding outcome through that process where we managed to do that. I still feel that if the report was assessed in regards to not having a loading facility in First Avenue available for the developer, I think there would be some real issues there for this development in being able to function. I really feel like there are some major problems that would have been if we don't allow for this First Avenue. We've had the compromise on the streetscape. There are things there that the public lose out to enable the hotel, a private development, to be able to get the tick of approval and support. I mean, obviously the benefits of having a 4.5-star hotel in Mooloolaba is fantastic, and I support that. I know that once this building is completed, that the public will like it. There are a few things that I wish we could have ended up with much better outcomes. The public plaza area has no weatherproofing whatsoever. So to me, that through a different design component aspect, we may have been able to come up with some way of being able to provide some weather protection for those people. The 34 car parks of visitors and also the non-hotel component, in other words, the retail component, are going to be locked behind a boom gate. And in the past, in Mooloolaba, we have been moving towards making sure that they're ungated so that the public can get access. And I'm still not convinced that, you know, the management system or the legibility of being able to access that car park, knowing that they're available for the public and visitors, is going to be that easy. But I'm hoping that they get it right. I mentioned about car parking and the car parking ratios. I was concerned because this is a holiday destination, and when they did the surveys, the other hotels, they used Ipswich, Kangaroo Point, completely different types of hotels and different demand and visitor
Councillor,
need
can I just get you an extension, please? Someone to move. Councillor Maria, thank you. Seconded, Councillor Terry. Those in favour? Not including Councillor Johnson. Carry on, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Thank you, councillors. So, you know, like for me, I just, again, I'm not going to argue. Consultants have done their assessment. I still have some doubts whether it'll work. I hope that we have an understanding with the way that they use the valet parking and excess car parking into the car park can give us some sort of leeway into better understanding of the car parking ratios on the hotels in a holiday destination. Because of its proximity to South East Queensland, anyone that will want to use a short term, and we've lost a lot of motels in Mooloolaba, so that night stay opportunity, but they're all drive within South East Queensland. They're not going to come in buses, they're not going to come in any other form. And I would love to see that a large percentage of these people do come from down south, because that's exactly what the airport and these types of hotel are wanting to generate. I'd love to say that I would be prepared to approve this. I'm not prepared to support this development on that one condition that for me, when I sat down and read through this, was a deal breaker. You know, for me to be able to justify to the community that we're giving public land to facilitate a development for no benefit to the community, you know, where we lose public realm, we lose the streetscaping on First Avenue to compromise to put this in, and to be able to facilitate and make this development work, the community is giving public land and there's no other benefit to the community other than maybe other commercial vehicles being able to use it as a drop-off area.
Thank you, Councillor Natali. If I can just ask a question, do the conditions include a requirement that the applicant maintain access through the park and go via Brisbane Road at all times?
Yes, Mr Mayor, there is a condition talking about all times, including construction, and one of the recommended amendments also talks about line marking that area to ensure there's no standing to maintain operation.
Thank you. Look, councillors, this site has been the subject of raging debate for decades, and it is a really important site in Mooloolaba, and the investment, as has been indicated before from other speakers, in hotels in the Sunshine Coast is going to be critical, absolutely critical over the next decade to service an increasing international market, but also to service an increasing domestic market, as by June, with the launch of Bonza Airlines, the Sunshine Coast will be second only to Brisbane in terms of the number of destinations it serves. People from areas in the north and central of Queensland through New South Wales down into Victoria, utilising any number of different carriers, will have an opportunity to come to the Sunshine Coast and stay. The fact that we initially developed the car park on that site, which again, when complemented by this investment, I think will see a rapid uptake of parking capacity in that facility, and indeed, the hotel will provide customers to that park and go who may not be staying there, but may be attending a conference or having dinner or a meeting or the like. But this really does, I guess, tick the starting flag, if you like, to see, a great outcome on that site. And those of you who've been around for a while would have seen lots of proposals. Certainly Councillor Natali would have done lots of proposals to go on this site. And it's probably a good thing that it's taken all this time to get a final decision, because I think what we are getting is an outstanding example. And I'd be surprised if the applicant and the developer didn't pay attention to what councillors have intimated and seek to ensure that this investment is in line with the expectation of the Sunshine Coast and the quality and standards that we expect to have. So I can remember at my honeymoon on the Sunshine Coast in 1980, this area was a problem. It was a challenge around parking. A lot lower buildings back then, I might add, than there are today in Mooloolaba. But if I think about all the investment that we're making, particularly along the beachfront with the walkway, this is a preeminent area. It will service, significant markets of tourists and residents alike, and it certainly will get my support today. And if there are no further speakers, I'm going to go to Councillor Hungerford to close.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I go over once again the amount of time we've spent on this and the business we have to get through for the rest of the day. I think we've all heard it. We all know where we're at the moment, and I'll be supporting this, and this is moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll put the motion to the vote. Those in favour? Councillor Babarowski, Landsberg, Cox, Johnston, Dixon, Hungerford, O'Prey, Suarez, Jamieson. Those opposed? Councillor Law and Councillor Natali. The motion's carried. Thank you to the staff and our guest presenters. Thank you. Thank you. Councillors, I think 11:21 we might take a break for, say, 15 minutes. Mr Kearney, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and good morning, councillors. This report on the management of requests for road closure applications is directed at protecting community assets now and into the future. So the purpose of this report is to seek council's consideration and adoption of a strategic policy for the management of requests for road closure applications, with community interest being the main driver. All councillors have received a briefing on this report and the motivation behind it, but I'm sure that the information to flow will align with the principles and values supporting such a policy. So in the overview, the proposed policy recognises the process where applications for temporary and permanent road closures come to Council first for comment. These are then collated stating Council support or rejection of position put and then provided to the Department of Resources for consideration and decision. Applicants, as a side issue, must be an adjoining property owner. This process is consistent across Queensland. This policy is not about managing road closures for traffic management purposes or the like. This is at another scale where the outcomes, if approved, are permanent road closures. So Council's response is managed by Property Management Branch, where requests for feedback are disseminated across target areas of Council. The comments are collated and that response provided to the Department of Resources. So currently, and importantly, there is no guide for officers to inform their responses around protecting current and future community value, nor a corporate basis to support consistent consideration across the branches of Council. So the proposed policy outlines principles and values guiding responses with community's best interests protected. It's not to say that a Council officer can't think independently when asked for comment, but those considerations will benefit from the guidance provided by the policy. I will talk to these guiding principles that are listed here in turn. So, under preservation of function, and this is a historical principle here, road reserves typically and historically provide for the movement of people and goods by way of existing and future use by vehicles, cyclists and pedestrians, but also accommodate other uses such as the right-of-way for utility services and community amenity through space for trees and streetscaping. And the policy position is to preserve that potential, so that's a start point and fundamental. So then we move to preservation of existing and future community benefit. So the preservation of public land for future generations is in keeping with Council's vision by protecting the potential for connectivity, amenity and green spaces, and particularly as population growth occurs on the coast here. Unused road reserves will grow in community value and will eventually realise their potential. So then we have preservation of future access. Many undeveloped road reserves provide accessibility to key locations such as waterways and quiet green spaces. So the policy position is to preserve and protect future accessibility to those waterways, conservation areas and public spaces. They lie dormant at the moment, but that potential will, I believe, over time be tapped into. Changing land use. The full benefit of an existing road reserve yet to be realised may be revealed by future land use changes over time. Council in general reviewing and developing new planning schemes every 10 years or so is a trigger for such possibilities. So preserving road reserves will allow future community benefits from land use changes to be realised. Minimising future costs. So road reserves facilitate the provision of services such as transport, water supply, sewage, telecommunications and electricity. There could be significant cost to purchase land parcels in the future driven by relinquishing an existing road reserve. And I've personally experienced such a thing to have to happen. So minimising future costs is preserve what we have because relinquishing it may mean that we have to buy it back in the future. The policy position protects the possible unnecessary use of community funds into the future for such a purpose. Then enhancing environmental protection. Road reserves do provide, contribute significantly to the environment. Preserving all or parts of undeveloped road reserves for the protection of remnant vegetation and key corridors for fauna and flora in community ownership is crucially important. The policy position recognises the importance of preserving environmental corridors. And as an example, in these three photos probably talk to a rural area, but as you drive down the road that's shown there, you wouldn't be aware that there's an unused road reserve, and you wouldn't be aware that the end of that unused road reserve is beautiful environmental space at the end of that. So that's one example, but it's a true example and one that's been tested by an application. So I think that I'll limit it to that example, because where there have been examples by others, property owners have moved, as is their right, to apply for a road closure, and I think that the essence of what the policy looks to do, especially in rural areas, is shown very clearly by that example. The risks by not having a policy, I believe, are that the primary risk is that without the policy, loss of community assets may follow, and the secondary risk is that financial one I referred to, where lost assets or road reserves may need to be repurchased by council. So the recommendation is that council receive and note the report titled Management of Requests for Road Closure Applications, and adopts the draft strategic policy for management requests of those road closure applications in Appendix A.
Thank you, Nick. Someone to move? Councillor Babarowski. Seconder, Councillor Hungerford. Would you like to open, Councillor Babarowski?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. Councillors, I think for most of us this is a fairly straightforward consideration. Let's remind ourselves that we, to some extent, owe a debt of gratitude to all the planners and public officials in the past that gave us a road reserve network to actually protect now, or to argue about. I'm actually often really pretty impressed by the fact that they had to anticipate the growth of this region and had done a very good job on the whole of providing us with these road reserves. So having said that, we did have a policy that was missing. And it's important that providing such a policy gives our community a greater sense of certainty. That's important. The other thing is that, as Mr Cooney, I keep wanting to call him just Nick, Mr Cooney has outlined, it provides a very important guide based on seriously solid principles for our officers for the duration of this policy, should you wish to endorse it. Councillor, that makes a lot of sense to me. I hope it makes a lot of sense to you. I'd ask you to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Babarowski. Councillor Johnston.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The only aspect of this, and I've already talked to Nick a bit about it, of this overall policy is that there is nowhere in there that gives an officer an ability to recommend a road closure other than a minor alteration to a boundary or something or other, where there is no doubt a significant benefit for us to do so. There's no discretion, and I know enough about local government now that if this policy is adopted, just about anybody who wants to do anything, wants to apply for any sort of a road closure other than a minor truncation or something like that, they're Western Dixie. So I just think that there should be in there, and I'll flog this, but nobody agrees with me, based on a few situations where stupid decisions were made in the past to apply or to allow road closures to occur. And we've had to since buy back those areas. But in the rural and remote areas of this local authority, we have road reservations which go over cliffs. There's no sense to them. They weren't put there by this council, they were put there by the state many, many years ago. Many of them are just totally inaccessible. But under this policy, there is no ability whatsoever for a council officer to recommend a sensible road closure. And for that reason alone, I'll be voting against it. I agree with it predominantly, but that's the only concern that I have. I think it puts everybody in a straitjacket.
Thank you, Councillor Johnston. Go to Councillor Hungerford.
Mr Mayor, I'll refute that. It doesn't put everyone in a straitjacket. I'll go on further. This policy will provide consistency across council when officers provide feedback to proposed road closure applications. It's got different departments have to deal with it and give their recommendations. So this will give a consistency. It does not preclude the potential to support a road closure application should community benefit assessment allow. So that takes that one out. So we looked on its merits. The long-term vision is to preserve and protect road reserves for the benefit of existing and future communities. Because as we develop and grow into the future, you've got to have these provisions there for that orderly development to happen. And like Councillor Babarowski said, those in the past were very good at looking ahead to that and providing for these in the first place. Unused road reserves hold a future benefit for a future community, and this potential is to protect it and preserve, notwithstanding that the future benefit may not yet be known. Now, the preservation of function of road reserves typically provide for the movement of people and goods by way of existing and future use by vehicles, cyclists, pedestrians, but also accommodate other uses, such as the right-of-way for utility services, electricity, phone, all those sort of things, and community amenity through space for trees and streetscaping. It's all important. The policy position is to preserve this potential. Now, there's several areas there, but the one that really strikes a chord with me, and Nick has referred to it, to minimise future costs. Road reserves facilitate the provision of utility services such as water supply, sewage, telecommunications and electricity, as well as transport-related outcomes. These can be significant costs to purchase land parcels in the future. By relinquishing an existing road reserve, should a requirement become necessary, the policy position provides for possible unnecessary use of community funds to buy back investments in the future. I've experienced this. There's been a couple of projects that I've dealt with where they were in the past road reserve, they were relinquished, and now we're buying them back at substantial cost. That's a cost to the ratepayer. It shouldn't be there. It's that road reserve would have meant we had it to do the job with. There's a couple of those at the moment. And I even had one where a road reserve was extinguished, right planned a pathway. But now because that's gone, I've got to scrap that project, and that would have been a magnificent benefit to the community. But that lack of vision of giving rid of the road reserve ruins the ability to provide those things. So this is very good work, Nick, and we need to have a consistency with this that hasn't been there in the past, and I commend it's a very sound document, and I wholeheartedly support it, and I ask every councillor here to support it as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. Councillor Dixon.
Good morning, and thank you, through you, Mr Mayor, to Nick, if I can. Firstly, I do support your policy, and thank you for giving me a briefing before today's meeting. It was good to understand some of those historic issues, and you even referenced one in Division 6 that I was unaware of in terms of obstacles for the future and costs to the community to get that area back for future projects. So it makes a lot of sense, given that you've given me examples and the need for the policy. A question that I've got, further to Councillor Winston, he talks about the process and potentially not too many ways to deviate from the strategic policy. My understanding is that most decisions can be decided upon or overturned by the CEO or full council. Generally, there's delegations to the CEO or full council. As we have a right to bring forward development applications to full council to be discussed and debated, although your strategic policy doesn't say this, is there an ability to request by majority an application or decision to come before full council? And if so, would that be to open gallery or would that be in closed session?
Through you, Mr Mayor, in approaching that question, I'd say that the policy and any considerations are fundamentally based on overriding community benefit. So the policy is proposed to be, it contains principles that and values that guide consistency across the organisation. If a road closure application is brought before council officers, I would believe that the policy would not restrict a pragmatic approach being taken if there was an overriding community benefit to be seen in that application. If those officers fail to see that, I believe it could escalate to CEO to have it addressed in that regard. It's not the policy and the word used in there, it's all about guiding to get a consistent response, and the principles and values do that guiding. It doesn't lock it into a box to say, and you can never say no.
Yep.
I just wanted to make the point that I sympathise, and I've heard Councillor Winston's concerns last week in a conversation that I had with him. It does make sense, but you've made it very clear to me that there is an opportunity, and that's our roles as councillors. If we see overriding community benefit, we can make those discussions clear with the CEO and our colleagues. And I'm comfortable hearing your response today, and I will support this.
Is your question related to... Okay, I'm going to let you go ahead before Councillor Law, if you don't mind.
My question is, how does the process work? Because my understanding is that road closures are circulated to all the departments. The comments are there, and basically, if any one person in that says no, then it gets refused. Is that right?
Through you, Mr Mayor, no, I don't believe that to be the case. The requests are sent out across council from Property Management Branch. Property Management Branch then receive all the responses, and they are given the task then of collating and working through the responses to, perhaps in recognition of the policy, if the one comes through, that between the policy and the responses, they have to apply their wisdom and their responsibility to come up with a response to the Department of Resources. One no doesn't swing the argument.
Have you ever seen our officers ignore a negative response from any one of those 16 odd people that it circulated to?
Mr. Mayor,
because
yes.
well, of recent times I haven't seen it. And that's the problem with what's being suggested and what's being commented on here, because we don't all live in an urban area. We also have extreme rural areas.
Thank you. Go to Councillor Law, then Councillor Suarez.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. Just first of all, a quick question for Councillor Winston. Bearing in mind I also share one of the significant rural areas of the Sunshine Coast. In your comments speaking against the motion, against the policy, can you let us know why you picked out only one example from the examples that have been offered that could lead to a road closure being supported?
I didn't know that people would need more than one, but I could show you dozens of areas where...
No, sorry, you misunderstand the question. You said that there is only one opportunity to have a road closure not allowed, and you said it's in minor nature. There are, in fact, 3 other examples that are very...
They're all minor in nature.
I don't agree.
Well, maybe you understand it a bit better than I do.
Okay, well look, I'll give it a go just for the fullness and completeness for everyone in case it's not been seen. There are a number of examples provided by Mr Cooney, not only in this report, but in the very broad and good conversations in the work that he's done, workshopping this and presenting it to all of us. So a permanent road closure application may be supported where the road closure is of a minor nature, as per what you said, is part of an equivalent lands... No, who interrupted you, please? Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Point of order, please.
Thank you, Councillor.
Is part of an equivalent land swap facilitating an equivalent or improved corridor providing and or preserving community benefit? Addresses an untenable situation for a property owner or involves the installation of essential utility infrastructure. So, as for quite broad examples, I'm satisfied that there is enough scope in this policy to meet the future demands of our region. And I know that I have used and accessed road reserves across the whole region, I suppose mostly in the hinterland, I would have to say, where walking, cycling, running, I'm going over road reserves, fire trails, footpath networks, all accessing these types of things that are out there for the community benefit. So I certainly wish to support the preservation of road reserves with a very clear, consistent approach that the council staff can implement when they have to consider these applications. And it's very important that we preserve what has been put aside for the public and community benefit for the long term, because our past experience shows us that we've got it wrong a few times. I spend a lot of time enjoying the hinterland, and I think I'm now speaking to the motion, I'm sorry. I've asked my question, I've spoken. I'll be supporting this. I urge everyone else to, for our future benefit and for the future benefit of the community. And in some cases, we will have no clue what that means. But let me tell you, there are some really awesome places where, yes, you get along public access tracks and you end up at a cliff top. And that is absolutely divine, to be able to go to those places, spend the time in nature and enjoying it. So thank you very much for the policy, and I'll be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Law. Councillor Suarez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Law said a lot of the things that I was going to raise. There is that point which where a road closure might attract support where it's an untenable situation for a landowner. This is a policy that's not necessarily set in stone forevermore. If Councillor Winston has certain circumstances that may require an amendment in the future, I'm sure that the council team would be amenable to look at that. But I'm comfortable with the report as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Suarez. If there are no further speakers, I'll go back to Councillor Babarowski to close.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief. I wanted to acknowledge and thank Councillor Winston for his arguments really in defence of some of the imperfections of that network. Did they get every part of that design right? Trying to anticipate long into the future? Probably not. But I think the core point here is two points. One is that if you can recognise a greater good as part of the political body and you don't think that the officers have properly focused on that, there is a mechanism, we always have that mechanism that's been described to you, that you can bring that to the debate in a council chamber and argue your point. But I don't think, from what I understand, nor does the policy really intend to close that door completely. It does its best to say that it's sending a very strong signal that we don't know what we don't know, and you have to really protect the assets for the greater good of the region in the long term. And I think that does that for the duration of this policy. That, as Councillor Suarez said, doesn't mean that it won't be changed in the future. So, councillors, I think it is a very reasonable approach, and I'd like to acknowledge the experience of Mr. Kearney and the team behind this, because I think it really reflects a great deal of experience in its efficiency in the way that it's presented. So thank you, Mr. Kearney, and to anybody else involved. A policy well constructed, and I look for your support today.
Thank you, Councillor Babarowski. We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? So, Councillor Law, Suarez, O'Prey, Hungerford, Dixon, Atoli, Cox, Landsberg, Babarowski, Jamieson. Those opposed? Councillor Johnson. The motion's carried. Thanks, Nick. You're up for the next item as well, which is the infrastructure 8.4 infrastructure charges resolution amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council's infrastructure charges resolution is a statutory document giving Council the ability to levy infrastructure charges which contribute significantly towards the provision of trunk infrastructure, which we all know is required to support growth. The current version of the resolution is number 8, and it was adopted in 2019. Under the provisions of the Planning Act, to amend the existing resolution requires Council, by resolution, to adopt a new infrastructure charges resolution. So, not everything in this report is of a major nature, but I've brought together 5 matters for your consideration, because whatever I change, minor or major, requires your resolution to enable it to proceed. So the report seeks Council's approval to adopt a new resolution for the reasons provided in the report and explained in the following slides. There are 5 areas within the resolution requiring change. These are presented here, and I'll speak to each of these in turn. So the first, community residences and rooming accommodation. So the issue is that the charge rates for community residences and rooming accommodation for 1-bedroom proposals are considered high for this type of use, especially considering those in the community occupying these facilities. So the current arrangement for accommodation long term looks at suite with 3 or more bedrooms, suite with 2 bedrooms, and a suite with 1 bedroom. And the suite with 1 bedroom is the focus of this change. It sits at the same charge as suite with 2 bedrooms, and the proposal is to bring that down to a more appropriate level, reflecting demand that goes with a single bedroom suite. So the proposed arrangement is simply to reduce that charge from around the $21,000 mark to around the $15,000 mark. The second area to look at is the correction of the unit of measure. And again, it's an administrative matter only, but I need to go through it with you. The current phrasing in Resolution 8 describes these uses, community residences and rooming accommodation, in a manner that's not consistent with the phrasing of the state planning regulation and requires adjustment. The change is to move from, in a minor matter, currently it says a suite bracket with 2 bedrooms closed bracket, and I need to change that to read for each suite with 3 or more bedrooms, etc., as pointed out on the slide there. As I said, a purely administrative matter. The next item is around retirement facility charges. Under the current charging provisions of Resolution 8, retirement facilities and residential care facilities are beneficiaries of a 30% reduction in the roads and parks proportion of Council's charge, introduced with the adoption of Resolution 3 back in February 13. The reduction was to recognise these developments, retirement facilities and residential care facilities, as generally have occupants that place reduced demand on the road and parks networks, as compared to a standard dwelling house. It is now considered that the relevance of this reduction for retirement facilities no longer applies and requires Council's consideration. So that issue is to remove that 30% reduction and bring it back to the total charge that applies. In previous discussions with the Council, I was asked how do we compare with other local governments that are experiencing growth. So looking at Brisbane, Gold Coast and Moreton Bay Regional Council, they have no reduction applying to this particular use. Retirement facilities have changed over recent years too. They're now promoted as over 50s retirement resorts, and that's a major driver for bringing this to your attention. Residents are generally more active and mobile, placing demand on Council's transport and parks assets. And note that this doesn't relate to residential care facilities, it's only those retirement facility charge that I'm asking your consideration to remove the 30%. And the figures there show how the quantum of that change. Function facility charge for resort complex use. So where a function facility or where function facilities are provided at resort complexes, if that function facility doesn't qualify as an ancillary use, there needs to be a charge, an infrastructure charge applying to that, because it's open to the general public. And if, just as any other development would attract a charge, where it's not contained to resort users only, resort users and occupants only, the proposal is that we now say, okay, apply infrastructure charges to any commercial, entertainment and function facility that's associated with the resort, but not restricted to the residents or the users of that resort. It's then reflected in the wording of the resolution to apply that change. And then lastly, again, this is not a major point, but the current prescribed amounts update. As we introduce an infrastructure charges resolution, number 8, number 7, whichever, at that time, it's appropriate that we apply the index charge as we know it at that time. But we can't update the resolution with indexation because we need a council resolution to do that. So we don't want to bring a report to you every time there's an indexation adjustment. We apply that by statute to all infrastructure charge notices that we issue. And we index that again from the time of issue to when the payment is made. This is purely to have the resolution brought up to currency, and it will sit there as a guide until the next update with council comes along, notwithstanding that we update that with every infrastructure charge notice issued. So that's the last of the requirements for council's consideration. So I ask that you receive and note the report and adopt infrastructure charges resolution number 9.
Thank you, Mr. Kearney. Someone to move? Councillor Hungerford. Councillor Dixon, would you like to open, Councillor?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. As Nick's gone through in great detail, and I won't cover all of that again, the proposed amendments to the resolution result in minor change only to council's infrastructure charges revenue and no discernible impacts on council's investment in trunk infrastructure. This is just fine-tuning and getting things right. Like I said, with the planning stuff, the definitions, and you've got to cross the T's and dot the I's to avoid legal challenge. Now, council's ability to levy infrastructure charges is provided in the Planning Act 2016. The Act sets the maximum charge rates that can be applied by local governments for development approvals for various types. Councils can then, by resolution, choose to apply an infrastructure charge and set infrastructure charges at or below the maximum, as is deemed appropriate. Under the current resolution, councils' adopted charge rates are generally, with a few exceptions, at the maximum range under the legislation. And that's important to get the revenue we need to provide that trunk infrastructure. What's more importantly to be known here is there are instances where we have other agencies that are also sharing in the funding. Community Water is an example. If there's a 50-50 arrangement and the money collected, it goes to there. If council has lesser than the maximum charge, council carries that whole amount because Community Water will still get the full amount they're entitled to. Any reduction won't apply to them at all, only council, and that would then impede on our ability to provide trunk infrastructure. So it is important that we receive the necessary funds to deliver that trunk infrastructure, which this policy does. I congratulate you again, Nick, going through these, and it is important for council from time to time to look at all these policies and make relevant adjustments to keep it up to date. Good work, and I ask councillors to support this because this takes us forward and ensures that we're getting the adequate funds that we need to provide those services to our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. Councillor Law.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I just wish to focus on a particular element of the report presented around the community residences rooming accommodation. And I'm grateful to, the work you've done, Mr. Cooney, around identifying an opportunity to make a small difference that may be able to encourage some additional development of this type of accommodation, given the current situation that we are in with a housing crisis lack of available accommodation, as well as a growing number of people homeless and living on the streets and living rough. This might provide opportunities to see some crisis accommodation emerge, and every little bit we can do to help and encourage that is to be commended, and will set us apart from some other areas who just charge the maximum amount in these places. So I will certainly support this to achieve those results, and thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Law. Councillor Babarowski.
A quick development of the point Councillor Law's just made. The $6,000 reduction on the accommodation suite with one bedroom from 20 to 14. Is there any way that we would know that that reduction would translate into the costs to the end user? I know that's a very difficult question for you, Nick, but maybe is in the discussions around this report with the ELT or anybody else, did anybody think that will actually make a difference to the end user or the purchaser at the end of the chain, or will that 6,000 ultimately disappear into some other outcome, profits or something else? How sure can we be that that'll make a difference at the end?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. It provides the opportunity but provides no certainty.
Good answer.
Okay, no further speakers. Go back to Councillor Hungerford to close.
I don't think I need to cover it again.
We'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much.
Councillors, item 8.5 is the February 2022 Financial Performance Report. I welcome Isaac to give us a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, all. Our council is here today to present the financials for the month of February 2022. The report compares council's current financial position to the latest adopted budget, which was amended at the previous council meeting last month. So council is for February, our operating results are $124.8 million, which is favourable to budget by $1.8 million. The variance consists of $1.3 million above budget for revenue and expenses below budget for $480,000. In terms of highlights, we had increased holiday park fees for the extension of the school holidays in the month of February, and operational expenditure remains within 1% of our budget. The capital works program was revised through the previous budget review. We're currently sitting at 51% overall, with our core at 49%. Council's cash for the month of February is $278.5 million. We had a reduction in our debt for the month of February, as we had a debt redemption payment scheduled for that month. Similar comments to the previous month, the Palisade payment will reduce Council's debt to $486 million by June this year. And the recommendation today is to note the report, February 2022 Financial Performance Report.
Thank you, Isaac. Someone to move? Councillor Hungerford. Councillor Johnston, thank you. Would you like to open, Councillor Hungerford?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I won't go through everything there, Nick, but all I can say is another excellent result. Council has a positive operating result of $124.8 million, which is $1.8 million above the current budget as of the 28th of February. As of the 28th of February, $441 million operating revenue has been achieved, which is $1.3 million more than the current budget. As of the 28th of February, $316 million of the $316.8 million budget year to date has been expended, which resulted in a variance of $480,000. Importantly, Council's operational expenditure remains within 1% of budget year to date, and we've been consistently achieving that. Now, Budget Review 2 has reduced the capital works program from $315 million to $290.6 million. To explain that, with the increase in materials, availability of materials and contractors to do the work, we're struggling to get it all done in this financial year. I think everyone across industries everywhere is experiencing the same problems at the moment. So they're being carried over into the next financial year, because we realistically won't get them completed by June 30. So as of the 28th of February 2022, 150.1 million, or 51.6% of Council's $296 million capital works program has been financially expended. You can see we're into February and March now. We're still struggling even at that point there. Costs of materials and availability is anywhere between 10 and 50% increase. Then the supply of those materials, a lot of them are imported. So the availability is also pushing projects back, and that's the climate we are in at the moment. The core capital program has progressed 94% of budget with an actual spend of 82.7 million. Council's debt at 28th of February is 642.5 million. And as Isaac has pointed out there, with the Palisade payment coming in June, Council's debt is forecast to be 488 million as of the 30th of June, which is an excellent result. And we need to keep a focus going into the next budget on the availability of resources, those to be able to do the job, the tendering, and what we can realistically deliver next year. And that's what we're doing in our budget process at the moment. All I can say is excellent result, we're on track, we're continuing that all the way, and it puts us in a strong position going into next year's budget. So I'll put you all, this is an excellent report, and I wholeheartedly support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hungerford. Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, question through to the CEO. I'm not sure if we can make this figure public, but I do realise this is the February performance report, but recently we had some pretty adverse weather events, and the council swiftly decided to allow residents to take their damaged goods to the tip. And I suspect, that's unplanned for. We didn't budget for that. Do we have a rough figure on how much that's actually cost this organisation to do that? And I understand it was for a week or two. Surely there must be a significant cost attached.
Bill will give you an insight on that. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mr Mayor. Look, you're quite correct. As a result of the significant rainfall event and the flooding within the region, there was a period of time where self-haul general waste was free of charge across all of our resource recovery centres, and for an extended period of time, self-haul garden waste and green waste was also available for our residents. At last count, over that sort of 2 to 3 week period for the combined general waste and garden waste, the support we provided to our community was probably circa $500,000 by way of waived fees to support the free disposal of general waste and garden waste. We are currently working with the state government in regards to the recovery of some of that expense associated with the waiver of state waste levies and other bits and pieces, and we'll continue to work with QRA to see what additional expenses we're able to recover to support that. But in essence, circa $500,000 worth of support to our community.
Thank you. Councillor Johnston.
Can we, or if we can't, why can't we recover those additional costs, including the actual working on the tip, etc., from the disaster recovery relief funding, federal funding? Is it part of our 1.7 minimum before we get that benefit?
Look, through you, Mr Mayor, we probably don't have a direct response to that in full. In addition to the state, Queensland Reconstruction Authority funds and the federal funds that are available to us, we're certainly going to seek to recover as much of that expense as we possibly can, but I can't give a commitment that the full cost is going to be recovered. I'll come back with further detail.
Councillor Babarowski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make the point. I think you've opened a very important door to an awareness of the community that both the significant duration of rain and then the follow-up severe thunderstorms not only affected, obviously, vegetation and general waste. There was a lot of damage, not a lot of damage, but significant damage to our road network. There were a number of landslips, in fact a fairly significant number of landslips that will obviously now cost council to remediate. But I think again, I look forward to perhaps a future either a workshop or a report to council or a mechanism to let us understand how we took full advantage of the QRA process, the $1 million that's already been committed by the federal government and so on to reduce the bottom line cost to this community, fully acknowledging that in an event like that, there is a bottom line cost to the community, but one of the things I think we've done incredibly sensibly was to anticipate that and develop a $5 million fund, which allowed us to have an amount of money that's set aside that gives us the capacity to respond appropriately without then impacting on other parts of the budgets which require reallocations or cessations. So I think we're in a good position, but we will have a lot more detail to come, councillors.
And through you, Mr Mayor, if I may, to give council confidence, at the establishment of that process, cost centres were established, so costs associated with all aspects of council's response to that disaster. We've been able to record that information, and then we'll just need to align that with the various state and federal government disaster response support that's coming our way.
Thank you, Bill. Councillor Law.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor, just a question. In the report, we've got the debt position on the 30th of June being 488, and in the presentation 486. Just like clarification on the correct number, please.
Through you, Mr Mayor. The correct number is 486, I believe, so potentially a typo in that.
So will the report be corrected then?
Yeah, correct. I can update that.
Thank you.
Thank you. No further speakers. Go back to Councillor Hungerford to close.
I think I've said it all.
Thank you. Put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, Isaac. Bill. If we go to item 8.6.
To item 8.6, I, Councillor Winston Johnson, notify I have a, I suppose, perceived declarable conflict of interest in item 8.6 to be considered at today's ordinary meeting. 8.6 relates in part to the resumption of land at Caloundra, and the owner of some of that property is the Caloundra Masonic Lodge. I wish it noted that I am a member of the Millennium Masonic Lodge. However, I do not know any of the Masons in Caloundra Lodge, and out of an abundance of caution, I will exclude myself from the meeting and this matter whilst being discussed.
Thank you, Councillor, and welcome, Brad, for the presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all through you, Mr Mayor. This item relates to the resumption of land in Oval Avenue and 3rd Avenue, Caloundra, for the Caloundra Transport Corridor Upgrade Project, the CTCU. Specifically, this report is to advise Council that following the service of notices of intention to resume for 7 properties required for the project, written objections were received from 2 landowners. The purpose of the report is for Council to consider these objections and decide whether the properties are still required for road purposes, and if so, proceed with the application to the Minister to resume the land. At the ordinary meeting of 31st of January 2019, Council resolved to proceed with the negotiated acquisition of properties required to deliver the CTCU. In August 2021, Council resolved to commence the compulsory acquisition process to run in parallel with those negotiations, in case the negotiations proved unsuccessful. To date, Council has successfully negotiated the acquisition of 13 out of 20 required properties. In November 2021, Council served the Notices of Intention to Resume, the NIRs, for the remaining required properties. The NIR and associated documentation set out the reason for the acquisition, explained the compulsory acquisition process, and provided a mechanism for each landowner to submit formal objections to the compulsory acquisition if they wished. Council received objections from the owners of 2 properties, 19 3rd Avenue and 15 Oval Avenue. A locality plan of the properties against the proposed project corridor is shown on the screen. Council provided the objectors with an opportunity to have their objections heard in person. The owners of 19 3rd Avenue requested their objections be heard in person. The owners of 15 Oval Avenue did not. Following consideration of the objections, an objection report was prepared and sent in draft to the landowners to review its accuracy. No comments were received to the draft reports. The objection reports were finalised and forwarded to the landowners on 18th of January 2022. The NIRs, the written objections and the objection reports are provided as confidential attachments to this report. The objections and the responses to those objections are confidential as they relate to negotiations relating to the taking of land by a local authority, and they are of course of a personal nature to the landowners. I will take the report and attachments as having been read. A typo has recently been identified in the objection report for 15 Oval Avenue. The address description is incorrectly written as 15 3rd Avenue rather than 15 Oval Avenue. All other details in the report are correct, including lot and plan description, and all references to the NIR and to the owner details are accurate. I make this clarification to you today, and we will also make this clarification in any application to the Minister should the recommendation be supported. The land requirements for each of the 2 properties is shown on the screen. The Acquisition of Land Act sets out the process of objection to compulsory acquisition. Any objections relating to any potential negative impacts to the balanced land as a result of the resumption are matters that are dealt with through compensation. Compensation is not a valid ground of objection under the Acquisition of Land Act. Also, objections must relate to the land which is the subject of the NIR, not to anyone else's land. The recommendation for this report is that Council receive and note the report titled Disposal of Land, Caloundra. Resolve that after due consideration of the objections, the 2 subject properties are required for road purposes, and to continue the compulsory acquisition process for acquiring the land. Thank you.
Thank you. Brad, you want to move Councillor Terry? Thank you. Seconded Councillor Dixon. Okay, would you like to open, Councillor Terry?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Look, we've had numerous briefings on this acquisition of property, and it won't be the last time that this is going to come across our desk with such a growing community. I know there's other regions on the Sunshine Coast that will need major upgrades to our road infrastructure. I'd like to just compliment our strategic property group on the engagement with our residents during this whole process. I know it's been extremely difficult. I've met them individually as well, and we've gone through the process of the impacts to these residents, and obviously Council's been very complimentary in valuations and working with each impacted member that will obviously have to make way for this multimodal corridor. I don't have to obviously explain in terms of the need for this as a major priority as a multimodal corridor into Caloundra CBD. We're witnessing increased congestion across the Sunshine Coast, and this has also been noted by TMR as a major upgrade before they do any upgrades to the Caloundra Nicklin Way roundabout. We previously just had a residents meeting as well in front of probably 80 odd residents at the Powerboat Club 2 weeks ago, attended by the state representative and the federal representative as well. And many questions were asked and obviously delivered on the night. I'm just looking for your support here today, councillors. I know it's an extremely sensitive issue for Caloundra, but much, much needed for the future of Caloundra as well. Thank you.
No questions from anyone? No comments? Okay. Need to close, councillor? Okay, let's put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? Council, we've got everyone. Okay, thank you. Unanimously passed. Thanks, Brad. Someone fetch Councillor Winston, please. To the event centre. Here he comes. Thank you, Councillor. Councillors, that brings us to the end of our agenda. We don't have any notices of motions or petitions, and there are no confidential items to be addressed. So I'll close the meeting at 12:30, just in time for lunch. Thank you.